Okay.
Okay,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Thank you. Thank you,
All right,
Teresa.
you are live.
Thank you, Teresa. We are now live, which means we have officially started the Wednesday morning meeting of the House Appropriations Committee, and all members are here, and we are going to start with some overall committee discussion and planning about how we're going to put out our day, because we have a lot of moving pieces between budget numbers, budget language, CRF adjustments, new CRF spending, and the stimulus equity bill that we're working on separately. And so Diane just brought up that on language, she had a piece of language that she wanted to put a placeholder for regarding Building Bright Futures, their IT, and that is going to become an issue in January. It's not language for this budget, and I don't know if it's January or not, but not for this budget. We have on our schedule that you may not see, at 11 o'clock, we have Betsy Ann Rass coming in from Legislative Council. You may want to pencil that in. There has been some requests from members in different caucuses about clarifying or clearly stating what our intent was when we passed the budget and passed 1 year of funding for the state employees and were silent on the second year. And so there is some language that we will look at and consider at 11. At 1:45, we have Treasurer Pierce, and we're just waiting back to hear from Teresa when Becky Wasserman from Ledge Council could come in and do the reviewed language because Mike O'Grady is busy, and you look like you have a time already, Teresa.
Yes, she is available at 10, so I'm booking her
10
now.
o'clock. So at 10 o'clock, if you put that in, we'll do the stimulus equity bill. And that is Becky. Okay. All right. And so before I jump right in and get started on outlining some of where the CRF dollars that our committees of jurisdiction are working on today, does anyone have any questions or anything that they would like to share with the committee, or any updates that you feel the committee needs to know? Not language or numbers, because when we jump to those, you can do all your updates there, but. Okay, so I just wanted to review quickly what the committees of jurisdiction are looking at. Diane is working with the committee down the hall, and there was additional pressure within adult days in the human services. This is all CRF spending. Okay, so let's put on our CRF hats. Diane is working with the committee to look at adult days pressures there. We did funding that secured them through September, but there's pressure to move from September to December, and also money for additional nutrition requests, Diane. And I believe that includes, that number includes Meals on Wheels, right? That's not a separate request. This is the Meals on Wheels.
Yes, from Dale?
Yes.
Yes.
And
you don't want me to talk about, I just put it out there.
Yep, and that pressure was about $600,000. Is that correct?
Right, and what I was racking my brain back and forth about yesterday and the day before was because the Joint Fiscal Committee approved a $600,000 back in August 12th. And so people were questioning, like, is this a double? Is that? Because it's pretty close to the same number, because it's 565,000. So anyway, long and the short of it, and I won't take your time now, but it is a totally distinctive and separate request. And I found it because the Dale had requested it in their proposal. They thought they were doing to Joint Fiscal Committee. So there's 565. That's for the Meals on Wheels. That is important that it only gets what we've been doing, or the increase, to the end of December, which is because it's CRF dollars. It would end in December, and we'll have to take a look at in January, because we're not going beyond that with this, is like $1 million more if we wanted to continue at that rate, but that's later. So So if you want to, if you're writing it down, it's 565,000 of CRF dollars here. And adult days pressure is they don't have a reopening plan yet. And we're trying to figure out what's the dollar value or what should we reserve based on an unknown. And we had put, it took $2.4 million of what we put in June for their 3-month period. So I think we'll probably, it won't be more than 2.4. It could be a little bit less than that. That will
And
get to October, November, and December.
And I have that it would be approximately 50% of that. And I have a number in my head of about 1.3, Diane.
That would be the range, because if the thinking is if they open, and that's the key word, if, and if the opening replan is at 50%, they would need somewhere in an unknown dollar. So that makes some sense. But because we have no idea and they don't know what their reopening plan is, I just wanted to make sure we didn't cut them short, and depending on what we've got for dollars.
Okay, thank you, Diane.
You're welcome.
Any questions for Diane on those two pieces? Marty?
So are we talking about a 1.3 or 2.4 for adult days plus 565 for nutrition?
Yes.
And I'm talking, and in my
Okay.
mind, and unless Diane brings me something differently, I'm talking at 1.3 for adult days and 565 for nutrition, because it's for a shorter period of time.
And Marty, if you want, or I can at least provide, which we might have, there is the nutritional report that they produced. It's about 11 pages, really good detail on it, that I was racking my brain trying to find it, but then it was actually, because it was only submitted to the Joint Fiscal Committee, which you found within there, and Connor Kennedy was very kind enough to have provided it to me when, I think on camera, I said, why do I have this note for Meals on Wheels? Was it? And I had a report that was meals, but it was the report for the school meals. This is for the older Vermonters, not that. But I can send that to, either Teresa has it, but I think Marty, you'll like it.
Okay,
Okay, but this is for a Meals on Wheels program, not a food bank kind of thing.
Correct. This is the increased rate for them to be able to provide what they've been doing. This would continue to December. And then we'll have to talk about where we want to
Okay,
go in
Okay,
January.
I got,
Okay.
the next
Right.
piece I want to move to is right next door to the Housing Committee. And they have been working very hard with understanding the housing dollars that have gone out. And we had some great testimony about housing dollars that have gone out. And I received an email, and I believe it was from Winooski, that said they now have available housing for every homeless vet. It doesn't mean every homeless vet is housed, but they have housing available for every homeless vet. And that's one population that they feel they have now been able to address. Did anyone else read that email or see that email? Peter, you saw that email. So that is good news moving in the right direction, at least with one population with homelessness.
Yeah.
So what the committee next door is looking at our continuation of housing projects that can get out the door by January, by December 30th. And that was an additional 4 million. And then for the rental registry, for the rental registry was 400,000. And I would need Dave to be in touch with that committee and get the details on those 2 CRF requests that they're working on. And the next one, next door, Mary or Dave, you both have working with the healthcare committee. Their committee is working on CRF for underserved populations. It has to do with health equity and I think they're looking at approximately $1 million going out to healthcare initiatives and health equity. And I do have that written down on another piece of paper that tells me more about it. But if the two of you can find out and keep track of what the committee across the hall, it's still, I'm sitting here in my living room and still talking about the committee across the hall, but it makes sense in my mind. They're working on a $1 million CRF proposal.
Kitty,
Yes?
I was thinking of going to their meeting this afternoon because they're also going to maybe talk about their language, their placeholder language for the mental health clinicians. I
Okay.
have also suggested to them that they think about money for designated agencies and trying to see if there's an opportunity to help them in ways that they're not able to through the other channels. So something else may come from there.
Thank you, Mary. And that's where you just mentioned something is where I'm getting confused. When you say placeholder language for the mental health clinicians,
Yeah.
are they still considering the funding for those positions? If it's a placeholder without funding, or is it, if they still need the funding for the positions?
Absolutely want the funding, the entire amount of the funding, and just want to have a description of who would be engaged in the process for moving that out and setting up that program. Is that a fair, Maida, is that fair?
Yeah, you might want to clarify where that funding might be, whether the funding stays with VSP or is moved elsewhere.
So
in their
we'll go
thinking.
back to that when you bring the package forward, Maida. You can give us a complete, I didn't mean to cut you off, Maida, I apologize. And the only other piece with that, we did all receive, I think, I don't remember how many were on the email, but Vermont Cares Partners has weighed in on the mental health clinicians, in connection with the Department of Public Safety. And so I'll make sure to get that email out to everyone. If you weren't copied on the email, it may have just gone to Mary because she had a budget. But now I got sidetracked off CRF, and I'm sorry, but I needed a bit of.
Oh, that
clarity.
wasn't CRF? Okay.
No, none of that was CRF.
Yep. The
Okay, so
clinicians are not CRF. If there's money for designated agencies, that is CRF, as well as the healthcare equity question
Is CRF.
is CRF.
And so for education, there was no support for education with CRF monies in the proposal that we received from the administration. And Chip is working on this budget with the Education Committee and Chair Webb about the additional pressures schools are seeing to be clean and safe and ready to reopen, and remote learning for kids that are not coming back, or for those that are doing a hybrid. There's all sorts of moving pieces within education, getting kids back to school on the 8th, as well as the consideration. We wanted to hear from them about the CRF money for the Vermont State Colleges, which we knew was a real, the nexus wasn't great there. And so we came up with a proposal yesterday, Chip, if you would walk through that proposal with them. It doesn't mean those CRF dollars are now available because we have done the swap. That's really important. We have done a swap, and we will be getting some language from them due to COVID, changing the school days from 175 to 170 days. So we'll want to hear some testimony on that. And there's also, they're considering out to the private institutions, the private colleges that are open and sprinkled throughout the state, and what their COVID-related expenses are
Kitty,
in need
on
for.
that, on that,
Yep.
on the last bit about the private colleges and UVM, I think is somewhere included. Kate indicated at one point to me that she was working with Peter. I just wanted to check maybe with Peter, make sure. I've not been covering that is my point, and I just want to make sure that Peter is on top of it, or that Kate is communicating.
Hello.
Yeah. Peter?
Hey, Brian, not bad. How are you?
Yes, yes. I've been in touch with Kate via email and been in touch with Kitty and been in touch with Wendy Koenig and
Okay.
yes,
Thank you. I just wanted to make
And
sure.
Steve
thank
Klein.
you.
We are finding where we're running up, we're up against the wall with any available CRF money. So for any new initiatives that you have hanging out there, it would be working within CRF dollars and reducing from other areas. And so Mary, in particular, when, you know, the mental health piece, if it's within the $1 million has been, that they're looking at in the health committee, if there's an additional request for them, there's no, I mean, we're really, all of them are being looked at. So we'd have to make accommodations within another area. Because as I add up these numbers, we're getting closer to the 198, and we have to remember over 18 million was sprinkled throughout the budget. And then little additional in our construct that needs to go to the Department of Health. So that's about 20 million used. And there's a large chunk that the governor put on the table for economic development and businesses. And so Mike Marcotte is looking at a very large chunk to stimulate our economy. And once we start talking, you know, 20 million here and 35 million there, it's eaten up really, really quickly. And then there is a proposal that came before us for the end of year construct. If CRF dollars have not gone out the door and we have balances on December 20th, we have to make some very quick decisions to know where those CRF dollars go, because if they're not expended by the 30th of December, they go away. And so our hope is that we have found the correct needs and these dollars will go out the door. But if there are balances, there's some proposals on the table of where those dollars would legitimately go so that they're used and not just sent back. And at this time, there was a proposal that came to us about 3 Squares Vermont. And if there's additional dollars at the end, could we support food going out to families and elderly people that receive 3 Squares Vermont? So that's just a proposal out there to keep on your radar. And there's a fiscal memo on it. Teresa or Maria, could you get that fiscal memo on 3 Squares Vermont and send it out to the whole committee so they can see a proposal that was sent to us with that request. And finally, within commerce, this is where a large chunk of the remaining CRF money would go. And Mike Marcotte in his committee, there's many moving pieces in commerce and what they find for priorities and choose not to have for priorities. I've personally weighed in on as a legislator, not as a member of this committee, but as a legislator of what my priorities are. And I've been mentioning that for a couple of days. If you have your priorities as a legislator, contact chairs of these committees and make your thoughts known. There is a hazard pay bill that is coming out of the Senate. And it is to address other individuals that were not covered in the first hazard pay bill. And those were essential workers. And, you know, one example that keeps coming up, our grocery store clerks. Had our grocery stores not stayed open, that would have been a significant problem for the state. And the clerks had more exposure one-on-one than many other Vermonters that were taking our cash and bagging our groceries. And so I know that it's individuals like that that are being considered in that hazard pay, but that's starting on the Senate side and not on this side.
Kitty, may I?
State dollars? Oops.
Excuse me?
Kitty, do you know if the Senate is talking about doing anything to adjust hazard pay for EMS workers who were excluded the last time?
I believe that was part of that was a topic in the discussion. I don't know where they have landed. And Dave, that would be a good thing to follow up with on the Senate side, because I do know that there was a group of EMS that, depending on if they
Yes.
work in a municipality or not, that
Right.
fell between the cracks. So would you follow up on that one?
I will. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So that's where we are for CRF dollars, and committees are going to be making decisions really quickly based on testimony and information that they have been gathering. And our committee, we will work like we did before, go out and manage and know what their decisions are and have some input with those committees. But also as individual legislators, you can do your own lobbying for priorities that you think should be represented in these dollars. Marty?
Yes, 2 questions. The hazard pay bill that you said the Senate is working on for perhaps grocery clerks, is that using CRF money? That would be a
Yes.
proposal?
Yes, yep, that would be continued CRF money.
Okay.
So that's another chunk that goes.
Okay. The other comment I have is I can anticipate a couple of changes from the Energy and Technology Committee. They are making their official recommendations today at noon, but I can advise that most probably they are going to withdraw the request that the governor put in for 125,000 for additional hotspots.
Marty,
That was CRF money that was going to be.
let's grab our numbers.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Where can we find, is this in language or numbers? Where it was in the numbers section or language section so that we can,
It's in language.
okay, will you get us the page number so we can follow along? So this is important, and I finished with my CRF, so this is a great time.
It's on page 6 of the language.
Thank you, Diane. Page 6 for some people and not page 6 for other people. But it's 6 for me, so that works for me, Diane. Thank you.
What's the section number?
It's B1104, number 2.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
And the hi-fi hotspots,
Yes.
and what is their decision on that?
And they will be asking to have that, I'm sure, by noontime, they will give me a definitive answer, but they are asking to delete that because there will be language to modify Act 137, which was Bill 966, that already had money for a lot of energy and technology, or a lot of broadband uses. And there's a little bit of room in that particular bill with 17 million that was already appropriated to move funds around. And so they're going to be modifying that bill to use money that already exists, CFR money that already exists. So they don't need this extra 125.
And I want to make it really clear for people who are listening, it's not that they're deleting the Wi-Fi hotspots or using money from,
No.
okay, they're using the additional money, not the additional that was left over in 137, Act 137. Is that correct?
Right. Well, it wasn't left over. There was just some money that was not designated for particular purposes. And they have the flexibility within that to move money around within the 17 million we've already appropriated.
Thank you,
So
Marty.
they probably, again, this is 90% probable, they will remove that particular request. But they, in their other considerations, they are considering asking for an additional CRF funds for another project that they feel is legitimate. That will
Okay.
be part of their request that will come to us.
And so would that be in the amount of 125, or is this additional requests?
it may be as much as 500,000. They
And
have
do
not
they,
defined that yet.
okay, have they made this initiative known so that 500,000 is accommodated if they need it? I think chairs needed to bring proposals before today, so that, you know, we could start working on what the total money would be.
Correct. They will be ready by noon to define what that number is. And they
Okay.
have done some investigations to determine if they believe it is appropriate for CRF. They believe it is, and they believe it's a more immediate need that could help the broadband efforts as opposed to other things that we've been talking about.
Okay,
But that's just a heads up that will come at noontime, but I can't tell you exactly how much.
okay, thank you, thank you. I'm just gonna send. Interesting to me. All right, anybody else have an update that they would like to share? Because I've worked through the CRF pieces that I have. Any other pieces that committee members that are ready to take off the table, either in language or in numbers? Not yet. Kimberly, can you tell me when Human Services is meeting, because they're making a lot of critical decisions today?
12:30.
12:30. And do you have any pieces that you could report on?
Yes.
Okay, then let's do your pieces that you have to report on, and then we'll finish up with the final pieces they're working on. You want language out or the numbers out, Kimberly?
Numbers, please.
Does everyone have their web report?
Okay, so let's start with B316, which is admin. And this, for those of us who have the version that Teresa sent us in the mail, this is page 35. So is everyone set?
Page 35 in the web.
Yeah.
Sorry, what section?
That's B316.
Okay, which actually, does that start right at the bottom of 34? I don't.
An hours.
Yep, it does. This is, I have 326 closed for
No,
OEO.
316,
Oh,
B316, 316.
Oh, sorry, I got confused. Okay, we were on DCF admin, Kimberly?
Right, so there are some pieces that move in tandem with another section, but basically in this section, you'll start out, you'll see the annualization of the Pay Act fringe and all of this. And this is also where the decision to delay the emergency housing initiative until fiscal year 22 first shows up, but focusing mainly on general fund. You'll see there's approximately a $419,000 up in general funds because of those position costs are put back in here. And Katie, I don't know if you'll remember all the discussion about the temporary slots and the program specialists. And anyway, that is all back in here. And you might remember that this emergency house initiative, that's the one where DCF was the lead, and that they want to make the shift to community partners instead. And this is going to be delayed till fiscal year 22. And you might remember we also approved language on the recommendation of the Human Services Committee the other day, and that also shelved this delay in language. And then the other reversions relating to this particular initiative, they show up later in B321 under general assistance. But going on in here, there's a $80,000 up in personal services, and that's due to the 1 quarter delay till October 1st of ESAP, which is the Elderly Simplified Application Process. And that's for getting some of ESD's benefits like fuel assistance, 3 squares, whatever. And an example, you know, the program that they plan to implement would be that, for example, enrollees would come in every 3 years rather than every 6 months. And this came up in Human Services as a potential concern, and the response on the part of DCF was that because of COVID, there are any number of waivers that are already happening. Because, for example, you don't need to come in to sign a document, and some of the site visit requirements have been relaxed. So from a client perspective, this delay, it wouldn't necessarily be apparent, we're told, and Human Services was okay with that. And so by October 1st, the only other thing I would add that these slots that are being saved, some of these savings, they will either be vacant and one will be vacant due to retirement, so there are no RIFs involved. In this section, you'll also see something that you're going to see in a whole bunch of other sections, which is a truing up and update to TANF, Temporary Aid Assistance to Needy Families, which is the federal program. And basically, this is an update to how DCF spends that block grant across the agency, rather than just have it show up in one part. And then under operating expenses, you're going to see that internal services number, and that's a down of about 40,000 with those numbers we know coming from finance and management. There's also a net neutral shift of about $220,000 from Reach Up in here. And that's for an MOU with the Department of Labor. And that's to better reflect the fact that the work isn't happening just in Reach Up. It's happening in some other places in DCF, and that's why it shows up in admin now. And then finally, on the topic of BFIS, the Bright Futures Information System, this is, you might remember from January, where a $250,000 shows up. However, that is just ongoing maintenance and operations, and that does not have to do with some of the issues we've talked about in terms of the overhaul, which is a higher number. And we will be revisiting that at a different time per Diane's report this morning. And then last but not least, and I don't know if Nolan is available, there is this is where the controversial shift shows up, that is the changes to how CCFAP eligibility is handled. And this was the change that the motivation on the part of DCF was to bring the eligibility services in-house rather than with community partners, as is currently the case. And we heard a lot about this in our public hearing. And I'm just looking through some, I'm trying to present DCF's views as well. DCF notes that ESD staff are already handling LIHEAP, Reach Up, 3 squares, etc. And on the part of DCF, they view as another benefit is that they're able to leverage these general fund salary dollars to draw on a federal match. And all these numbers are for 6 months only. So that would be starting on January 1. And the other important piece here is that we're talking about CCFAP eligibility piece, not the referral. So this is who you contact if you're trying to identify open slots. So under grants, you're going to see there's an up of around 41,000, and that's for the continuing referral piece that will stay with the community partners. And so back to eligibility, here is the chart with a lot of moving parts. And it's kind of like the Emergency Housing Initiative. And Maria, I don't know if you're in the background there. I don't know if Nolan is available, but essentially this is something that if you look at each of these pieces on their own, it really doesn't work very well. They're best viewed as a unit that moves once a policy decision is made. And yesterday in Human Services, by a vote of 11-0, they recommended against accepting this proposal to move the eligibility piece back to DCF. And I think we heard a lot of those reasons during our public hearings, and they have to do with differences like families going through metal detectors at state offices versus a more casual child-friendly environment of the partners like the parent-child centers, where they might also pick up things like diapers. We heard about all the social capital that's gone into building those relationships and how this might be, quote, one too many changes on the part of child care providers. So the upshot is that essentially it's going to cost around $613,000 to buy back this proposed changed. And I will let Nolan do a more elegant presentation if you want to dive into these ups and downs here. Thank you, Nolan.
Sure. Hi. Sorry. For the record, Nolan Langwell, the Joint Fiscal Office. So I put this sheet together to help folks better understand what the proposal is. And really, there's only two numbers you really need to understand in this proposal. Either the top one where it says 662,000, then that's the impact on providers for 6 months. So the question is, what is the impact on providers going to be? The answer is it's going to impact providers $662,000 for a 6-month period. So annualized, it would be double. The second number, Teresa, if you'd scroll down to the bottom, perfect, that's good. The second number is, what does the general fund need if we decide not to do this proposal? And that would be $613,000. So that would be how much savings the DCF is claiming by doing this proposal. They're claiming $613,000 in general fund savings. So if we didn't want to do this proposal, that's the number that we have to find in the budget to offset that. Now, the other piece that I'll throw out there is, in the ups and downs, there's a lot of moving pieces. And I pulled out, with DCF, they provided this and then I rearranged it, but these are all each of these lines shows up differently in the ups and downs. But the way to simplify this is really, you either do all of it or none of it. Because what it is it's not each individual thing. We're gonna do the move to CCFAP but not eliminate the 2 positions. The proposal is basically a unit. And this is all the pieces that go into that. So you either do the whole thing or you don't do any of it, because that's kind of how the proposal is structured. Does that make sense to the member?
Yes, it does.
And so that's what the sheet was basically trying.
Let me just see if there's any questions from anyone on this. Okay, I'm out. I don't see any questions. Okay. Do we need to go back to that chart though now, Teresa? Please.
So if there aren't questions for Nolan, but maybe Nolan, if you could hang around just in case there are questions that I can't get to that level of detail. But the other piece is when Nolan talks about things moving around, you'll see CDD in there. So that's going to jump us over to section B318. So if we could just hold what I talked about, this is a little weird way to do it, but because they're sort of connected, if we could just hold what I talked about with B316, or if we want to go ahead and adopt this per the recommendation of Human Services is my recommendation. But I can also then talk through 318, or if we want to wait and walk through 318 and then consider them both together, Madam Chair.
I think let's do it as a package. I think it's much clearer because this is an entire package of moving pieces.
Great. Okay. So I'm just going to pop down then to B318, which is, a little further in your web report. And so here, I'm not going to repeat what Nolan's already talked about. I think what might be most useful is just to briefly talk about the other parts of 318 and then try to, in my view, I think both those parts should be ready to go depending what we decide to do here. So in B318, under personal services, you're going to see there's a reduction to third-party contracts. And there was a question in the past about that 180,000, if it relates to some of the queries that members of this committee have been involved in. And just on the record is that no, it doesn't. This has to do with really a preschool grant writers and professional development, and essentially other one-offs that vary from year to year. You see the usual internal service fund down here, around 15,000 in general fund, and there's also that TANF 5-year plan that shows up here again. And there is a title for FMAP that brings a one-time down in general funds of around 174,000. And it's important to note that here in this section also is where the specialized childcare transportation shows up. That grant is general funds, but they're one-time dollars. So that's 648,000, and that's about 2,000 off, 2,000 down from what there was in January. And this is, I think it's fair to call it one-time bridge money, as we know that the administration, again, will propose a delivery shift in fiscal year 22, but I think we can wait to have that conversation then.
Kimberly, I have a question from Dave.
Yeah.
Well, tell me if this is the wrong time to ask it, Kimberly. I didn't want to break your flow, but I wanted to earmark. My question is, there's a dramatic increase in special funds from 1.8 million to 16.8 million. Can you tell me what's going on there?
I'm
Where
sorry,
the
Dave,
special funds
where,
are coming from?
where are you?
I'm on the web report.
Oh, you're back to the web
318.
report.
Sorry.
Okay, the web report increase gets to what I'm about to talk to, which is the CCFAP change.
Go right ahead then. Yeah.
Okay,
Thank
so the other piece that is in B318 is relates to year 2 of the 5-year early care and learning initiative. And that remains at $3 million, that package, as we had in January. However, those funds are no longer costed to the education funds. Remember, we had Keno there, but now they're originally proposed, as that was originally, now they're taken from the tobacco fund. So if you recall on pages 15 and 16 of the language, there are reversions of 3.5 million from an existing substance abuse treatment set aside that's being utilized. So $2 million of this is dedicated to CCFAP, and that would align with the 2015 market rate study figure and the 2020 federal poverty level. And then that other 1 million of that 3 million total, that is the same as it was back in January, which is that, again, I don't know if I'm getting into too many, that's that 750 in general fund up, and that I can break out if you want. And then the final piece to get to that 3 million is that 250,000 in BFIS that we talked about back in 316. So Dave, you might have to restate that, but that shift is essentially moving out of what was the ed fund and over into the tobacco fund. Is that what you were asking?
Well, yeah, I wanted to know the source, but what I'm trying to find out is the administration recommending essentially one-time dollars to pay for ongoing child care financial assistance program subsidies, changing the poverty level, the fair market rate, et cetera.
Yes.
Yes.
And so that's a lot of one-time money.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I'm sorry, go ahead, Kate.
I want to remind the committee, much of this budget, because of COVID-19 and the bridge money that came over from fiscal year 20 into 21, this is a really bridge budget. There are lots of one-time uses that we would not typically make. Otherwise, we would be making hundreds of millions of dollars in reductions, and it was against. We took some testimony from Cavett, and he said, a stable, steady ship is those are my words. I can't remember exactly what he used, but he really cautioned against making big reductions and increasing taxes in this time of uncertainty, and to just move this ship until we're out of this COVID-19 crisis. And so it shouldn't be a surprise to anyone on this committee that there is a lot of one-time use that we typically would not use, but those are the dollars that are available, and it's the recommendation of the administration. This one is particularly right out in front of us. We're using the SUD money, the remainder. I think it leaves 500,000. But the administration's proposal is to use this one time, and that they're they're committed. And we may not like the changes, but they're committed to make the changes to make this particular initiative work in January. And we may not like where they find the ongoing money from. That's always the risk.
Well, if I may just follow up though, I'm probably not comfortable with anything, but I'm more comfortable with what's understood to be at least a one-time bridge for using money for the state colleges. That's different. This though, if I'm correct, I think there's policy changes being made that provide, not that they're not needed, but expand the scope of services in the child care program with one-time money. That's different. And I'll go over that with Kimberly to make sure I'm correct on that. That's different to me than saying, okay, we need a bridge of one-time money to keep the program the way it is to buy more time. But if we're increasing the eligibility level by raising the poverty threshold, and if we're, and I'm not sure precisely, increasing the size of the benefit, boy, doing that with one-time money feels different to me than just trying to keep the status quo.
That is absolutely fair, Dave. That is absolutely fair, and you're right. Yeah.
As much as I would love to increase those benefits, even I have some pause when it's with one-time dollars.
Yeah.
Because there's so many other areas of state government. I could make a pretty passionate case that the caregivers in choices for care or the designated agencies need a cost of living increase, but I would never advocate it with one-time money because I'm increasing the base. Can you help me? Is the policy committee comfortable with this, Kimberly? I guess they are.
Yes, Dave, I would say that the policy committee did discuss this. As we all know, like the chair said, that there are tremendous use of the FMAP bump monies and other one-time monies in this budget. This did come up. And this is, I would argue that Human Services is the committee where all these parts come together, as you know, from different areas of human services, and they are okay with the $3 million construct, understanding that this is honoring also year 2 of the 5-year commitment that many of us signed on to not very long ago as the child care bill. And I think there's a feeling on the part of many on year 2, we're not about to go off the rails. I mean, there are so many things right now in this economy that are going off the rails. And we are finding now that people cannot go back to work. And there are many other things happening around childcare that are critical to this recovery and restart of the economy. And this is one of those pieces. So I would argue, not only because of COVID and not only because of our commitment that's honored previously, those things coming together and against the backdrop that, yes, okay, I hear your point, as did the chair, on an argument could be made that this is different. But I think if we wanted to go down that path, we could dive into this budget and we could pull apart all kinds of things that people may have less ease with, and perhaps in the past when we didn't find ourselves in the current situation where we are.
Thank you, Kimberly. Are there, Dave, a follow-up?
No.
Okay.
Thank you.
Diane?
Thank you. I think, when I look at, if we look at just in isolation that B318, especially if you're looking at the web report, and I don't know if this goes to your point, Dave, when I looked at it, I see that up in the special funds from 1.8 million to 16 million. It makes me go, but when I look at the crosswalk on it, 15 million of it is in the grants, is a TANF 5-year plan move, net neutral, goes down 15 million and goes up 15 million in special funds. And then when you go further along under B323, under reach up, you see where that gets swapped back. That goes up in their grants, 15 million in general funds and 15 million down in tobacco. I don't know if that helps to sort of, when I look at that 16 million, seems like makes me question what's going on. And Kimberly, please, you can help to tell me why or what, we did the swap. We did this, the swap in this grant to use special funds and now general funds in the reach up, but that maybe we can wait till you get to reach up. Does that, it's very, very complicated, sorry.
Yeah, yeah. Well, do you want to pop over to reach up right now? We've got two
No.
sessions we're on, B3.
Yeah, no, let's just stay where you're at. Like, don't come off of it, but I took a quick look to see if you question where that 16 million, when all of a sudden spiked, it's gonna come down over in reach ups later on.
Right, right.
Okay.
So, so going back to Nolan's chart and my,
Shirley,
Mary, go ahead. I'm sorry. Mary?
I can force myself to be comfortable with this use of monies in this way. I worry that it will then be the excuse for making policy changes that we're uncomfortable with next January. And another marker for the conversation that we have next year, for those of us who are fortunate enough to be here, is we can't allow ourselves to be forced into a policy change that we disagree with because we made this decision today. It's going to be hard next year. Thank you.
thank you, Mary. I have a black book here with an ever-growing list of things to be revisited in fiscal year 22, and I've just noted that, and I fully take your point.
Are there any other thoughts or comments for Kimberly on these pieces? And so if we keep the CC eligibility administration in the community partners, the chart in front of us shows that it will, and Kimberly had put this on the table, come at a cost of $613,000.
Yeah.
And the move was more for administrative reasons, not so much for betterment of the system. So that's, and we heard in testimony, there was some angst about, just moved it to community partners in either 11 or 13. Why would we move it back when we moved it and it's doing what it was supposed to be doing? And I remember that move didn't come easily as well. So for members, are there any questions? Let's go back to the full screen now, Teresa, please, so I can see everyone. Thank you. Any thoughts for Kimberly? Dave has put an important point on the table, and we've heard from Kimberly and Mary, talking about where we are and the pressures that this committee will be facing in January. Any thoughts on 13 or 14? Would anyone? This leaves $500,000 in the SUD fund for training purposes. It was a $5 million piece, and with this 2 million and the 1 million that we're using for the primary care providers, it would leave 500,000. Peter?
That's what I just wanted to confirm. I know of 2 more primary care physicians that are leaving the state prior to the end of this year. So that bill becomes even more important as minutes go by. So,
and the funding is still intact with that bill, Peter. So good. Kimberly, do you want to put a recommendation on the table, and let's think these come as a package? And so I think we need to address them as a package with your
Yes, I would propose that we shelve both 316 and 318.
With the changes as proposed
With
by
the changes, I'm sorry, with the changes as proposed and endorsed by the Human Services Committee regarding CCFAP eligibility.
So,
any questions for Kimberly? Diane?
yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know. Yeah, I guess I'm on. So if I say yes to this, am I agreeing to the move?
No,
Of-
agreeing
No.
to keeping the CCFAP administrative pieces in their community partners at a cost of $613,000.
That's what I'd like to do. Yes.
Okay, that's what you would be agreeing to. Any other questions or clarifications? So this is not agreeing with the governor's move. It's leaving CCFAP where it is. It's using the $2 million in the SUD funding to increase these rates to 15, as well as some other pieces that Kimberly and David had articulated. Marty?
I just wanted to clarify. I think if we make this change, aren't we spending 662 instead of saving 613?
No, I think we need 613 to do this change. Is that correct, Nolan?
Yeah, it's 613 general fund to reinstate or to keep it.
That top
Okay.
part, Marty, the 662, that was,
Yeah.
for the providers.
Yeah, that's when you start taking into consideration, remember the providers get the gross amount. And there's some downs in terms of, so the providers see the gross state and federal, we're only looking at the general fund piece. And there's a lot of moving
Okay.
pieces, which is
So
why I
we're-
highlight
we're-
this.
Okay, so if we make this change, we are not saving 613, we are gonna spend 613.
Right. And if you, we had on our sheet with Maria, because she has been following, Kimberly put that amount that we will be looking at some point today, I'm hoping, if Maria has it finished. Kimberly had put the amount on of 613 for CCFAP eligibility, not to be moved out to the community partners. Okay,
Kitty?
Mary?
Yeah, thank you. But just before we make this vote, I feel obligated to say again, I think I reported on this earlier, probably at the end of last week, my conversation with the healthcare committee in terms of what their priorities were. And they very, very strongly felt that we should be doing more for training and in particular for the mental health world. And they hoped that we would not spend the SUD money this way. They hoped that we would continue to fund the programs that we intended to do. That's the reason I've been fishing around looking for some other sources of funding for them. I feel really strongly that we hang on to that 500,000 that's left on the bottom line for this purpose. We will then have spent $3 million on training in this larger area. But we had put some of that SUD money into training because we were failing to find money for the designated agencies to increase their rates or to provide some other relief. And this was a way to try to accomplish that. So we're at the point where we're making choices among our children, but I just really wanted you to know the very strong feeling of the healthcare committee about continuing to provide training resources for the healthcare community. I'm not saying I don't support this, but I have an obligation to that committee to remind you of their view of this. Thanks.
Thank
Kitty,
you,
may I
Mary.
jump in?
Yes, you may.
Just
Yes.
a question on this issue. Kimberly, was House Human Services aware of House Healthcare's opinion?
I'm not going to comment about the interactions between chairs, Dave. I
Well, I
would
didn't
defer
say
to
chairs, I
others.
said committees.
Well,
I just wondered if when the committee made the decision, were they aware of the impact on the substance abuse training in the DAs? Or did they even discuss it?
I
Ultimately,
have
it's up
not,
for us, when two committees disagree, we ultimately get to decide. I just wondered if it was a decision made knowingly.
I have been in there for DCF discussions. I've not been in there for other discussions relating to healthcare around SUDs. I do know that there is, and I think this is what Mary was referring to, that there is another 1.5 million that was going for the DAs and the SSAs. And then we talked about that 500,000 and the bottom line of that fund that's still there. So all of those discussions, I have not been privy or part of.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah. And I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable at all. I'm just trying to understand if the policy implications have been vetted or not. And there's no time to go on. I'm going to shift a little bit, Kitty, because I don't know if we're doing this shelving one section at a time or both of them. But does anybody have a spreadsheet that shows if you do this in CFAP and increase the spending by transferring these one-time dollars, this much is a result of new policy benefits, and this much is a result of just sustaining the steady state? Or is it all a result of new policy changes? New eligibility benefits, new payment benefits. I'm just curious if it's, maybe it doesn't matter to people. I don't want to make people make work that doesn't impact us, but do you know, Kimberly, if it's all the result of new
I do not
benefits?
have a further breakout of those details. Nolan
Can you
may.
weigh in? Nolan, can you
I
weigh
guess
in on this question?
you'll have to forgive me because I am not completely following the conversation about the relationship between this proposal and the SUD. Mostly because
I'm off that now, Nolan.
It's off that one. Yeah.
I'm just trying to find out, Nolan, out of these increased expenditures, how much are attributed to new policy changes like eligibility, raising the federal poverty limit, raising the market rate payments, and how much is just trying to sustain the old without those kind of changes?
Again, are we talking about the CFAP?
Yes.
Yes.
So we're talking about this proposal right here. What this does is this was just the administration trying to look for savings. And so with the 613,000 is just maintaining the status quo.
Yeah, I'm talking about section 318 now.
Okay, I don't have that in front of me, so I'm sorry.
So,
Okay.
Maria?
can I maybe, yeah, I'm sorry. I may not be able to answer it completely, but my understanding is that we're talking about the increase to get to the current federal poverty level and also to get to the 2015 market rate. Is that what you're asking about?
Yes,
Okay.
correct.
My understanding is that $2 million is the new investment money. We have a plan. I think it's the second year of, I want to say a 5-year plan.
A 5-year plan, yes.
Yeah. And I believe that this is the investment money for the new investments to bring us up, just as we said, the poverty level
Okay.
and the 2015 market rate.
Oh, I misunderstood.
Thank
Thank you, Dave. I misunderstood that you were asking for that breakout within the 613. Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Sorry, I didn't make that clear.
And so Dave, in order to go to the second year of this 5-year plan, a lot, it's based on this one-time money of 2 million, which the administration obviously have put it forward and they're going to accommodate it in January. It's whether we like how they accommodate it that Kimberly is keeping in her notes, and we may choose to make adjustments in other areas. Or, who knows how there's many.
Thank you. I'm up to speed now. Thank you.
It's not typically how we like to do things. However, with COVID-19, we are in a completely different fiscal landscape. So any final comments, Kimberly, or from committee members, or clarification needed? So Kimberly's recommendation is to close 314 and 315, but not accepting the governor's recommendation to move CCFAP eligibility back to the central office, but keeping it in our community partners. And that is a $613,000 pressure that is already reflected on our list that we've been compiling. And it also allows for the $2 million of SUD money to be used as bridge funding to complete the second year of the 5-year plan. Did I characterize that correct, Kimberly?
Yes, although I'm not sure the section numbers you said correct. So where it's B316 and B318. I might have misheard, but just to be clear, those are the two pieces.
Are we ready to take a vote on this proposal? So if you are, if you support the Committee of Human Services recommendation and the recommendation from Kimberly, raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. Okay, and those opposed? Okay, I just have to wait because I have a lag from some of you to raise your hand, and so that's why I wait. And if you're opposed, I'd take a verbal no, please. We can close out 316 and 318, and Maria, there's all sorts of moving pieces, but I want to stick with that for a minute. If you go to your language, and it's on page 15, I can't find the section number, but it's right before section D 103, 102. So if you find section 102, go back a little bit and you can see where the administration is asking to take that 315,000 from SUD, use 200 million, use 2 million of it for what we just passed, and then they want to drop the other 1.5 into the tobacco fund. And I am hearing from the committee that Peter has brought up, we've already passed a bill that commits 1 million of it. And so we want to make sure that that's still in play. And Mary has put on the table that the remaining 500,000 would stay in the SUD fund and not drop back into the tobacco fund. Is that correct, Mary?
Yes, with the expectation that it would be spent on training as we had set up initially.
And that's what the SUD fund had stated. So by having it remain there, that should be covered.
Yep.
So are there any questions? And so I'd like to ask the committee, 1 million of it we would reserve for the primary care physician bill that Peter outlined, and we've already agreed to that. And the other, Mary is asking to keep 500 into SUD and not have it returned to tobacco. If you agree, would you please raise your hand? And those opposed, no. A verbal no, please. So Maria, on those pages, will you make that fix?
Yes, I will. I will do that. So let me just to clarify. So regarding the $1 million to the age 607, did you want that $1 million? You said reserved, but do you want that to go to the tobacco fund and then it'll be spent out of the tobacco funds?
No, we can all stay in the SUD fund because I think that's
Okay.
where, so we'll leave.
Yeah, that's
And-
the way it was drafted. Yes,
Okay,
the bill.
perfect.
Yep. Okay.
And then the 2 million will go. Okay, just so that it doesn't drop back into the tobacco.
Okay.
fund.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, Kimberly, what, did you have another section you wanted to go to?
Okay, we're going to skip B317 because there are discussions that are going to happen today in human services that involve Woodside. And then if we go to B318, we already did. And then skipping to Reach Up.
Do you want to do 319, Office of Child Support, or does that need to stay open?
Yeah. No, that one I have closed. That's the one you might recall where it had language around the electronic, the use of emails for
Oh, yeah.
child support, and it was a savings booked because of postage.
And we agreed to that, so 319 is closed.
Right, yes, and we also agreed to the language that shows that.
So the next section is 323 Reach Up, Kimberly.
Okay, here, this is where we're going to see some bigger moving parts. You have all the ISF reductions as usual. And then DCF usually bases its reach up caseload projections on the Leslie Black Pluma report. And in January, that was a down. They thought that there was going to be a decrease by about 450,000 in general funds. But with COVID, that changed to a $10 million increase, but half of that, roughly half of that, was in the first half of the fiscal year, July through December, and that is then covered with one-time CRF dollars. So when I'm looking in the more detailed ups and downs around that, that falls into that column. And that's one of the few places, at least in the budgets that I've had to date, where that column is activated. And then, let me find my place again here. And then the second half of the year, that's the January through June, and that is an up that does come out of the general fund grant. And then as Diane was starting to say, this is also the place where you see the true up of that net neutral move of that $15 million.
And so that's what accommodates for that big number of 22 million in general fund, where it used to be in the special fund. That's where the, is that where the $15 million swap?
I'm sorry, Kitty, the 20.
I'm looking at the web report, and the general fund went from 8 to 22.3. And the special funds went from 20 million to 6 million. There's two moving pieces. There's the pressure in reach up, and there's the $15 million true up. Is that correct?
Yes.
Any questions with committee members on that? Those large swaps identify two areas: the true up of the 15 from that net neutral swap, and also the $10 million pressure. Some of it's out of CRF, and some of it's reflected in additional general fund need. Kimberly, are there any other moving pieces? And this is all.
Yeah, the only other one is just, it's a net neutral. It's the Department of Labor MOU that we had in here, and now that's moved to B316. So that shows up as a down here of around 219,000.
Okay.
So I also ran this past Human Services about we talked about the various caseload changes with DCF in the room. And we were grateful for CRF dollars coming in to help out. And that is something, you know, we'll have to be keeping our eye on in the future, obviously, depending what happens with any second wave or things that we can't really predict today as we look at these numbers. So I would recommend that we shelve 323.
Any questions for Kimberly before we take that vote? Okay, if not, those that support shelving 323, raise your hand. This is on recommendation of the committee, and those opposed with a verbal no, just so we can get questions on the table. Thank you. Kimberly, are you ready to do 325 OEO?
Sure, let's do that. Okay, in OEO, this is where we see more reversions in the general fund that came from that emergency housing initiative that was postponed. That's about $216 in savings that shows up. And then this is also where you see the $6.2 million in general fund grant dollars that were reverted again because of that same delay. And then you see the usual ups and downs in the internal service funds. And this is also where we saw the two program eliminations in January that were not restored here in the restatement budget. And those are relating to the micro business development program and the IDAs, which we now rename the Vermont Match Savings and Financial Capabilities Program. And that cut happened despite both the Commerce Committee and the Human Services Committee, recommendation that they be restored. And so the base cost for restoring those two programs would be $293,339 for the micro business development program and $173,01 for the Vermont Match Savings and Financial Capabilities Program. I have to get used to saying the new title. That better reflects the program. And again, this was approved by both policy committees of jurisdiction. So the total up here would be $463,640 in general fund grant dollars. And those are ongoing dollars. And to the point that came up the other day that, again, I haven't been here, but apparently in the past 3 years, there has been $100,000 in one-time money that has been added to these programs, but I'm not proposing that now. But I just wanted to note that. And
oh, sorry.
no, go ahead.
Even though we're not proposing the 100,000 now, we I believe 1.4 in type micro business loans did go out in CRF money earlier.
Right, of that, yeah, on that, jumping over to the CRF track now, and they do cross a little here, is because there was that $1.4 million in CRF funds that was for the Embrace program, and that was helping disadvantaged micro business owners that were impacted by COVID with assistance to grants and technical assistance. And that amount was divided into $1 million in grants and $400,000 for other costs such as technology and additional personnel. And those CRF dollars end in December. But I would add, I think one of the nice synergies that happens here is those investments, and I have had some conversations with folks who are working on these programs that will greatly add value to both the micro enterprise development program and the Vermont Match Savings and Financial Capabilities Program. And that's because they're building some really great infrastructure and an enhanced website. For example, one of the things that they'll be coming out with, which I'm looking forward to, is a catalog where you can look all across the state to find out about all the different micro businesses that have been started. And anyway, that's a little bit of an aside, but the other piece is that they did have 1 quarter's worth of staff costs, October, November, and December, the second quarter of fiscal year 21, that staff were working with people who are focused on COVID. So that 1 quarter budget, that 1 quarter of staffing for the MDP program did help out as well.
And that's from the
But
1.4 because it's
that's
not
from the 1.4. But again,
Thank
I'm trying not to mix those apples and oranges, but I do think there are some kind of nifty synergies in my view. But what I'm putting on, tacking back to the budget, so what my proposal would be, and again, aligning with the 2 policy committees of jurisdiction, that we restore the total sum of the $463,640 in general fund grant dollars to fund these 2 programs.
And so my question to the committee is, those 2 grant programs are on our larger list that Maria has been tracking. Do you want to address those now as absolute priorities, or do you want to compare them with the whole list? My recommendation is that we would compare the whole list and not, and you know, because then we're going to go off on a conversation about every other priority that we have. So Kimberly has asked to close this knowing that those 2 pieces for micro businesses and IDAs are on a list to be considered. So closing it, agree to take them off, it means we'll consider those 2 amounts later. Marty?
Great.
I agree with just what you said. I was trying to clarify, in my mind, the money that's in 325 for the micro businesses is for the development of new micro businesses to help people get involved and get moving to develop their own businesses. Whereas the COVID money that was sent out of part of the Commerce Bill was to assist micro businesses that already exist. not to help develop new ones necessarily, but to assist those that already exist. Wasn't that the case with the CRF money?
Yes, it was not.
Whereas
for
this money in,
new. You're right about that, Marty. It was not the development of new. I believe you are right on that. Yes.
okay, thank you.
So
Yeah,
the
if I find
CRF
anything, I'm sorry, go ahead, Katie.
the CRF money was supplementing existing grants that had gone out, and the base money here is to create new micro businesses. Is that what you're saying, Marty?
Yes,
Yeah.
that's my understanding.
It's just that you're delayed, and so when you look at me, when I ask
Oh.
a question, you have the puzzled look, but it was for what happened about 10 seconds earlier. So that's why we're looking at each other that way. So Kimberly, go ahead.
Yeah, just one more comment before we put this in a temporary hold or however we choose to leave this section. I just want to let folks know this is also where the family supportive housing remains. So that was in the January budget, and that was a 488,000 up, and that was funded by Independence Place, if you recall, and that has since closed. And then there was a rental subsidy reduction that came out of general assistance. So that was one of Maria's nifty little charts, but the upshot is that the family supportive housing remains. And I know that's a program that House General thinks a lot of, I think, as does Human Services. I don't want to put words in their mouth, but I have had queries of whether it's still there, and the answer is yes, it's still there. So that's just the final part that I would add on B325.
Thank you, Kimberly. Any final questions for Kimberly on 325? And so her proposal is to close it, however, to keep micro businesses and IDAs on our list that Maria is tracking. So if you agree with Kimberly on 325, raise your hand. And if you're opposed, if I could have a verbal no. And the last two sections are both Woodside, and at this afternoon, the Committee of Jurisdiction, Kimberly stated, would be taking a position on how we move forward with Woodside. Thank you. This took off a tremendous amount of pieces that were still left there. Kimberly, are there any other language pieces that are associated with this that are open? We took care of making sure the SUD money went in the right places. But any other language that you had open?
The only other language would be that, again, and I'm sort of sorry, I'm muddling the to be done versus the doing. If we do end up putting back in that 463, 640 for the MBDPs and the match savings, then there is language on page 33 and 34 that has that subject to appropriations and the may versus the shall. So if that decision isn't made, then we need to go back and realign those language pieces. But I understand that that's a discussion forthcoming.
Okay, thank you,
So
Kimberly.
can I just mention one other thing on that, Kimberly? Did you already do the language change, the title change for the IDA account? Has that been approved
Yes.
already? Okay,
Yes.
fine. Thank you very much. Good.
Okay, what I would like to do is, Becky Wasserman is here. Can we take a 3-minute break? I need to grab a glass of water. Let's come back at 10:05 if we could. And I just need to get up and grab a glass of water and get a Kleenex. Becky, is that all right with you? Do you have time?
Yeah, of course, that's fine.
Okay, thank you.
Do you want to go offline?
We can just close out our videos and mute.
Yeah, just mute everything for a couple minutes.
We have enough back. Becky, do you have language so I can print off a copy to make notes on? Teresa, do we have a
Yeah,
copy
I
of?
sent it to you earlier. It's
Yes,
the-
Teresa, is that posted now? There's a new draft with changes that are highlighted in yellow.
I didn't post it because it was a draft. I wasn't sure if I didn't ask the chair, had time to ask the chair if it was okay to do that. But I did send it to the committee. But it's not the corrected version, but they do have the one without the edits.
Okay, thank you. I just need to print this.
But I have the edited version ready to screen share.
Okay, thank you.
Which bill are we doing?
Stimulus equity.
Stimulus?
It doesn't have a bill number yet. It's draft 201035. Drafting request number.
Okay, Teresa, would you pull the bill up on the screen for us and we'll in our speaker view?
I don't want to print it again.
Did we receive a new version or are we working off the original?
You received a new version in your emails? If you want to grab it, if you.
I'm looking.
It's from me just a little bit ago.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
Should be draft 3.1.
Oh, my printer's working and thank God it just makes it here. Okay, Becky, welcome. And we had a work group working on this bill last night. I understand you started your work at 8 o'clock, and I don't even want to ask you how late all of you worked, but thank you very much for the discussion in the committee. We have just kept going in circles, and so we're looking forward to the results of your work last night, and then we can make any accommodations as needed. But Becky, let's first walk through it and then save our questions for the end. Thank you for coming, and you all have the bill in front of you, and you may have your own copy as well. Becky, do you start?
So Becky Wasserman, Legislative Counsel. So I am sort of tag teaming this with Mike O'Grady. So he, I think he had worked with the working group to do some of these changes. So everything that is changed is highlighted in yellow. So Teresa, if you can begin to scroll down, I'll just point out where the language has changed. And I think a lot of it, the language changes are related to the income eligibility requirements for receiving these payments, as well as adding in some deadlines for the application process. So first in section 1 on line 15, under the definitions, a definition was added for economic impact payments, which is referring to the tax rebate for individuals that's authorized under the CARES Act. Subdivision 3, there is in the definition of eligible adult, a date by which an individual had to have been a current resident of Vermont. So that was April 1st of 2020. So to be eligible for this payment, you had to have resided in Vermont as of that date.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
You're supposed to save them for the end, Bob, but
No, I'll save it for the end then. I'm sorry. Yeah,
okay.
no problem.
On the top of page 2, the definition of eligible child, I believe what was removed here was the word legal. So an eligible child is an individual under 18 years of age for whom an eligible adult is a parent or guardian, and so it's removed the word legal guardian.
We'll come back to questions, so we'll continue.
Thanks, Teresa, for scrolling. And so the next change is in the establishment of the program. There's a date put in for AHS to award, to establish the program for immigrants on or before November 15th of this year. And then in subdivision 2, the requirements for receiving a payment.
I did. It wouldn't print down here for some reason.
Diane, we're
sorry.
going to mute you.
Okay,
Okay.
sorry.
So the requirements for receiving a payment were also amended. On line 14, a requirement was added with respect to your adjusted gross income. So you're eligible for a payment if you have an adjusted gross income of less than $99,000 in tax year 2019, or if filing jointly less than $198,000 in tax year 2019.
And that follows the CARES Act.
It does to some extent. There are some differences because there is a phase out. So you get $500 for dependents, and that isn't really reflected in these numbers.
So Kitty, I have an email from Mike describing the difficulties with doing this.
Okay.
And our committee wanted to do it, but we can talk about it a little bit more later.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, and I've talked about it with Mike, and I've been discussing it with JFO a little bit too. And I think there's some complications with trying to be exactly on par with what the CARES Act requires.
I should have followed my rule. We'll keep going.
Okay. Subdivision 4 requires that all applications for one of these payments are submitted on or before January 15th of next year. And then we can scroll down. The next page, I think this changes who AHS consults with when administering the program. So it's requiring from shall partner with public or private entities to may partner. So it's discretionary for AHS to partner with other entities on the sort of outreach and application assistance process piece of this. In subdivision 2, the agency is now required to adopt requirements, guidelines, or procedures to figure out how to disperse the payments to applicants who lack banking services or a mailing address to which a payment may be sent. In terms of the contracting requirements in subsection D, this is also changed to more of a discretionary determination by the agency of entering into a contract with a non-governmental entity to implement and administer the program. So the agency may enter into contracts as deemed necessary to do that. And I think that might have been the last. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there's one more change in section 2. The amount of funds set aside for administration of the program has been sort of X'd out for now.
Oh, huh.
Kitty, can I just make a comment before we get started?
Please,
there are
Chip.
three areas that your little working group thought we're going to need further input. One having to do with the income, whether we establish an income limit like the federal program, the timeline, whether or not, and these last two, I think we thought we should consult with Agency of Human Services about whether or not the timeline that we've set up is achievable and what the administrative costs should be.
And we should Teresa, I should have done this. We should reach out to the secretary and to Sarah Clark regarding administering this program. We need to hear from them. Can you see if either of them are available to pop on at some time today? That this is going to drop on their lap, and I neglected to ask them to come in.
Happy to.
So I would like to, we are at the end, Becky, right? You've brought us to the effective date.
That's right.
Okay, so let's go back and work our way through this for questions, and we'll end with the appropriation and the funding source. On the first page, page 1 of 6, are there any questions on lines 1 through 21 of 1 of 6? Can I have a full screen now, Teresa? Because I think everyone has a copy, I'm hoping, of their own. Does the committee need the copy up any longer? Yes, let's leave it up. I'll look for hands down here. I'm not seeing it. You can't give me a full screen, can you, Teresa, and not everyone else?
So you can go under your toolbar at the top under, I think it's under more, and you can expand or go out of full view.
Yep, I'm good. I've got it.
Okay.
You have your hand up?
Were you talking to me?
I am.
Oh, yes. My only question here is what exactly qualifies a resident, somebody to be a resident? What?
So
and I guess that would be to Becky Wasserman, I presume.
Yeah.
So there's usually a requirement to sort of be in the state and have an intent to stay here. And now it's hard for me to see with the not being in control of the screen, but I'm not sure if it's still in this language that
It's defined.
yeah, so in subdivision 5 on page 2, it's defined here. So it's defined somewhat differently in different contexts in the law, but here it's defined as an individual living in Vermont who intends to make the state his or her principal place of domicile, either permanently or an indefinite number of years. And in this definition, it says that if you're living here for a particular purpose involving a defined period of time, and they give examples of students, migrant workers, and employed in seasonal occupations, or just contracted here for fixed terms, those aren't residents for purposes of this section, and so they wouldn't be eligible for these payments.
Bob and Chip, please correct me, or Becky, if I'm incorrect, that we have used the definition that is used with the driver's privilege cards that's already in statute. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that is the case, yes.
Yeah,
That
I get it.
Definition.
Yeah, well, okay, thank you.
But if you need more clarification, Bob, now is the time.
No, I guess I've got enough clarification. I realize it's in statute, and it really doesn't fit for me, but it looks like I'm stuck with it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Bob. Let's move. Were there any questions on any other questions on page 1 or 2 of the language from anyone in the committee?
Mary.
Mary, I'm sorry. That's right. Thank you, Mary. You can't raise your hand. I apologize.
It's okay. I would like to have a discussion around the April 1st date to be eligible for the services. That was one of the changes. It's on page 1 in section 1, number 3. I assume there is an interest. Well, don't assume. Why did you pick that date? And why do we need a date at all?
I'll chime in first and the other members of the working group can chime in as well. But we were trying to pick a date that, was, because this is modeled after the Federal CARES Act, that was sometime about when that program people became eligible, or that program was rolled out, I should say. And so, in a sense, it's a little bit of a stab, but that was our rationale. But the reason for having a date, I think, is an important one, and that is that if you don't have a date, then this becomes a starting date, a date at which people had to have been a resident of Vermont. If you leave that completely open, then anyone could, once this program is out there and people know about it, anyone could come to Vermont, just to establish themselves, to indicate their intention to be a resident, and there would be no, we wouldn't know how many people that would be eligible then for the program.
So it would make it hard to calculate how much money we should have to.
Yes, I mean, I think, the intent here is to serve Vermonters, those people who are here as Vermonters who were ineligible, and not to try to serve people who are also ineligible and certainly deserving, but are not Vermonters at this point.
I feel less strongly about this than I do about some of the other dates. If the interest is in serving folks who are in our state, I'm not sure when they arrived is relevant. If there's a beginning and ending date for the application process, it does end. I mean, the irony is this, theoretically could be a relocation program. I mean, in other areas, we've paid people to come to Vermont, didn't agree with that, didn't think we should. But here we're trying to exclude people who might want to come. I would prefer not to see a date. I am sure I will not win this argument, but I just wanted to voice my preference for not having a date. If you haven't received a payment and you are a resident, I would prefer just to allow folks to receive it. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Mary. I have Marty and Dave.
Mary, my take on that was that the intent of this program is to help people who indeed have suffered through the problems of COVID in Vermont in the last 6 months, as an example. And that was the intent of the federal program, to help out folks who, and again, federal, it just went everywhere, of course. But if we are going to do a separate program with our own money for those who were not eligible for the federal program, I think we need to mirror the federal program as much as possible. And in my view, the people we're trying to help are the people who were here last spring and are still here and have not been able to receive that extra funds. So that was my reasoning for having it that way.
Thank you, Marty. Dave?
Thank you. Make sure I'm unmuted. Yeah, thank you. I wanted to go down to, I think, number 4.
I just want to stay on this one, Dave. I want to stay on this
Oh, I'm
date
sorry.
so we can make a decision.
Thank you.
Are
I'll
there
keep my
any
hand up for the
other,
next time. Thank you.
are there any other comments on this date piece? So let's, any other thoughts on it? I would like to take a position on it now. Maida?
Well, I did have my hand up with regard to this piece, wanting to continue with what Marty was saying. Namely, I thought our focus with this bill was helping the folks who had been left out or left behind by the federal program. And that would lead me to want to support the April 1 proposal being included.
Thank you, Maida. So are we ready to take a position on this? The position is at the bottom of page the vote will be at the bottom of page 1 regarding the April 1 residency requirement. Are there any other discussion before we either accept what is before us, or if we change or remove the date would be what's on the table? Is there any other discussion? Teresa, can I have a quick full screen, please? I'm sorry to do that to you. There we go. I've got it unpinned made up. For some reason, I just have, there we go. For those that are support the language in front of us, I need a hands up, please. Okay, and if you would like to remove it or change it, I'll take a hands up now. Diane, your hand is up. I mean, your hand was just up like this. Okay, so the committee supported on a 7-2. No, I counted 7-2, which isn't making sense because I would make 10. Linda, I missed your hand maybe. Which way are you? Take out the date or keep the date? You muted.
Keep the date.
Okay, and so the majority of the committee has supported to keep the date. So now that brings us through page 1 and 2, unless there's any other questions on 1 or 2. Dave, is your question on page 1 or 2?
Number 4, I'm not sure the page number. Hold on, I can look it up.
4 is on page 2. Your line 3 on page 4.
May I speak to that now?
Of course, yeah.
Thank you. My question, whoops, I'm sorry. There. No, I'm on a different number 4. I didn't want to speak about the guard.
Okay.
I wanted to talk about, so I'm jumping too far ahead, I think.
Okay, so you're ahead past this. Okay, so let's go to page 3.
So I just noticed there's 2 3s. I'm just letting you know. There's a 3 here and there's a 3 here.
Okay, so you will
Thanks,
fix.
Teresa. I'll fix that. Thanks for catching that.
Kitty, as long as we're near that guardian, let's take care of that, and then we'll move down to Dave's.
Okay, so I don't have any questions. Does any of the committee on this, on the word guardian? Is that what you're asking, Chip?
I just thought we were going to address each change, and
Okay, sure.
so the committee had asked that we try to find a way to make sure someone who, a child, for example, who was here under the care of a family member, for instance, but not in a legal, there was no legal establishment of guardianship, would still be eligible. So we, in consultation with Mike O'Grady, are asking if that would work. That's the change we made, is just to remove legal, so that if the agency determines that that person is under the care of the responsibility of an adult, they would qualify here.
And they would also be the April 1st deadline as well. This is an April 1st deadline, so we wouldn't, so
well, child's eligibility is really dependent on the adult. And
okay.
So,
yes.
Yes, eventually.
Of course. Any questions for Chip on this section? I am not seeing any questions on the guardianship. That addresses the concern from yesterday. So if we move now to page 3, and the numbering will get changed all the way through, but as it is in the bill, let's go to line 6 on page 3, Chip. Do you want to review that that addition?
So yeah, the establishment of the program, we were trying to set a date that would get the program up and running really as quickly as possible. This is the one where I said, and later the date by which application shall be submitted, are things that I think we do need input from the Agency of Human Services on. I think this would be as ambitious as we could go, but our intent was to have this stood up as quickly as possible. And yeah, that's it.
And Chip, perhaps something like this, if there was a delay in the date for some reason, that, is this anything that, I don't think this could come before the Joint Fiscal Committee if we're out. Could this, Teresa or Maria, could this come before the Joint Fiscal Committee when we make that end of year language? If they need an adjustment here, can that come before the Joint Fiscal Committee for change?
I don't know. I think that's clear.
I'm asking, yeah, I should have asked Maria on that. I'm sorry, or.
Okay, so I was just a little distracted. I think that you probably could bring this before the committee. I mean, I think that's your call. I believe that you could bring this before the committee.
As with any other CRF, you know.
That's correct. Yes.
I just wanted to put, this isn't CRF funds.
Oh, I
though?
know that. Yeah, I know that, but it.
Oh, okay, sorry.
We're planning for CRF, you know, some language to address that, and if this could be included within that language.
Kitty, I'm confused why you're even thinking this is necessary.
You mean with the Joint Fiscal Committee? If we hear after we adjourn that the November 15th deadline really needs to go out to November 20th or November 30th, an adjustment would have to be made, I would assume.
The date for establishing the program, if they can't do it on the date.
Yes. Yeah.
Don't you think they would we're taking testimony on a bill, it's going to go through two bodies. Don't you think they would be able to tell us that before the bill is passed?
Well, before the bill is passed out of this committee, we're going to take testimony from Mike Smith and Sarah. So I guess we can wait until we hear on that. My question is, regardless of what date we choose here, if something happens, if we have a big second wave of corona relief and attentions are elsewhere and it just doesn't happen, although this would be a huge priority then, you know, I'm just wondering what the capability is of the Joint Fiscal Committee to make changes if there's needed. But
I
this to hear from Mike and Sarah. Chip?
I think I take your point, and it's a nice way to solve a problem if we have one. But I think it's more important down on lower on the page where we talk about the application deadline. I mean, if they don't get it stood up, there's not really a penalty. It's if they don't get it stood up and therefore the applications don't go out in time, we might, the JFC might want to have the ability to extend the application deadline.
Is there any discussion on B1 before we skip down to the next section? We will be hearing, I'm hoping, from the secretary and from Sarah Clark about capacity to do this. And then Chip, let's go down.
Hang on, Kitty, I can't. So the draft that was sent to us says by November 15th. This says on or before, the one that's on the screen. So I just want to be clear that we're looking at on or before, not by.
You know, and that's how Becky said it. And I noticed on mine it said by, and I just, and so I apologize. Becky,
Mine says, sorry.
You have
Mine says by too.
The one that's on the screen, I believe, is the one that came back from the editors, and it may be just a slight difference that the one that was sent out earlier by Teresa hadn't gone through the editors yet, I don't think.
That's correct. I think that's the source of the distinction, is that our drafting format is usually to say on or before, and I think perhaps what was sent out to you all did not have that change from our editing staff.
Well, if I may, I much prefer on or before than by. I just want to make sure we're all on the same draft, though.
Yeah,
Thanks.
and this is the newest draft that we would be working from. Thank you, Mary, for that catch.
And Representative Toll, this is Nolan. If you wanted to have that flexibility of the Joint Fiscal Committee being able to move the date, if you're concerned about their authority to do so, you could just add it in the language saying that the AHS may ask the Joint Fiscal Committee to extend the date by X amount of time in the event of X, Y, and Z. So you could be specific to give yourself that flexibility if that's your concern.
Thank you, Nolan. That's helpful. Thank you. Any other questions on line 6 and 7 on page 3 before we move down to the next change? Okay, let's move down to, I think we had already had the discussion about was eligible. Can we move to line 14, letter C? Chip, do you want to talk about why the working group added this piece of language?
Yeah, the committee as a whole, we had been discussing about, about mirroring the federal program, which does have an income cap in a sense, but it does have a gradation at the end. Once you reach a certain point, then your payment is reduced until you reach another point at which there is no payment. It's complicated. I can read you all the email from Mike O'Grady if you'd like. Apparently the Federal Act does not simply set out specific income amounts, but makes reference to various tax programs. So this is as close as we could get to what's in the federal program. I will say that the federal program relies on tax returns, and the folks that this will be serving, almost the vast majority won't have that. It may be just that we ask, or that the agency asks for an attestation from a recipient that that their income in 2019 was less than this amount.
And I can add to that the amounts here are sort of the calculations. So there's a phase out at a certain income level of it's $5 for every $100 after certain thresholds, and this is the phase out for what you would have if you had no children. So I think what the complication is that there's $500 for every dependent, but you could have a number of different permutations of that based on your AGI and the number of children you have. So I think it's really difficult to put sort of a threshold for the qualifying children piece of it. So that's why these numbers were chosen. And I don't know, just like practically speaking, how many of the people who would be receiving these payments have income above these levels anyway. But, I think that in talking to Mike a little bit more about it, he mentioned that the California program just simply said that if you're not eligible for the CARES Act payments and doesn't reference specifically immigration status, that they sort of took care of it that way, but that might be approaching it in a way that, is different from what the committee wants to do policy-wise.
I have Dave and then Mary.
Yes. So if I'm a family of 4 with $100,000 in 2019, taxable year 2019, I lose that job and I'm working for day wages. Now, some 11 months later, I'm not allowed to get any help, even though my situation is vastly different. Is that correct, Chip? Am I reading that right?
You'd be fine, Dave, because you're filing either as a head of household or you're filing as a jointly. So you'd be fine under that. You'd have to breach above
thank you.
the one, breach above 198 to completely lose everything.
Thank you, Peter. Appreciate
That's
that.
how I'm reading it too. And I just want to mention that the CARES Act payments were also based on taxable from your tax year 2019. So I think sort of anybody who was eligible for those payments, it was based on last year's income, not their situation right now.
Mary? Mary?
Well, I have a separate, I want to talk about this, but I didn't understand what Becky just said.
State that, Becky?
So I think the way the CARES Act payments were done is based on your taxes from last year. And I think the question was just, let's say you lost your job 3 months ago or 4 or 5 or whatever it is. They're looking at your income from last year under the CARES Act stimulus payment. So this is similar to what that situation is. They're not looking at your current income for CARES Act payments either.
Okay, so to Dave's scenario, you're looking at my last year's income. I don't have income this year. I'm not eligible for this payment. Is that correct?
Well, and I think the scenario that was just given was a family, like I think maybe a family filing jointly with 2 dependents that made $100,000. So they would be eligible under these thresholds.
Let's just use a broader description. I'm a single person. I was making a lot of money last year. I'm not making any money this year. Based on the requirement that it be tied to last year's taxable income, I'm not eligible. Is that correct?
If your taxable year income if your AGI from taxable year 2019 is not within the thresholds here, then you would not be eligible.
Even though I had no income this year?
Correct, because this definition ties you to the taxable year 2019.
But Mary, we're talking about the population who were ineligible for the stimulus payments earlier. It just doesn't seem like, I can't quite imagine any of those folks having made more than $198,000 in 2019, filing as a family. I just don't know that we're going to be excluding anybody that we intend to help here.
I'm thinking more of people's perception and anxiety going into this program. And given that is the case, that we're not likely to exclude them, why are we even asking the question? I like the notion of just tying it to the general same standards of the CARES Act without being explicit in here. I'm just thinking of the process that I have to go through. I'm uncomfortable talking with government officials. You're now asking me about my income last year. You're asking me, and if we stick with this, we're going to need an appeals process to, if I am denied, then it just becomes more and more complicated. And I think we need to make it as simple as possible. If we think it's a small cohort that is likely to be covered by this, then why are we even including it?
So I think that's a fair point. The working group asked Mike O'Grady to include this because the committee as a whole had said that they wanted to try to mirror the federal program as closely as possible, including with an income cap limit. If we, I think making reference to the California program or using the California model to make reference to the CARES Act eligibility could do the same thing, but it still means that someone's going to have to ask the recipients what their income level was at some point, if we're going to mirror the federal program in either of those ways.
I hear you. I am concerned about the specificity of this.
Yeah, me too.
again, thinking about the community of people and how loosely they are attached to these sort of processes, I may look at this and say, this scares me. I can't participate because of that.
Chip, did
Well, I
we
just
take
want,
any-
if Mary wants to propose to the committee that we either strike it altogether, or use the California model of just making reference to the CARES Act eligibility, I think that's something we should put in front of the committee and decide and move on.
Chip, before we do that, what I would like to do is to hear from the executive director and to see what kind of issue this would create with the group. And she's able to come in, and if we could hone in just on a couple of issues for her to weigh in on, I think it would be helpful to us understanding what the challenges are with the groups we're trying to help.
Great.
So let's hold out page 3, line 14C for to hear from the executive director. Let's move.
Can I just make a, I don't know if I'm on. Can I just make a I'm sorry. Can I just make a comment on there too? So I think, but that I think it was 2018, not that I'm advocating for this. We did not have our 2019 taxes done when the federal CARES Act went into effect. Just saying.
That is a 2018 year date is my.
Just saying. And the other thing is that I believe that I am totally with Mary on this one, that I get why we had it in the CARES Act because of that there's a variety of income there that they wanted to make sure we didn't over support. But this particular population, as you stated, is already going to have trust issues. Being able to prove and if I'm going to come in it from the other side, AHS has to manage this. How are they going to be accountable to us when we say to them, did you give it to anybody that made $99,999? They won't have the tools to be able to work with it's a very complex problem for the person managing the grant to have to be responsible for. So we'll come to it when we hear about it, but I totally think for simplicity that should just go away. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. Thank you. Let's move to line 20 for this deadline. All applications for payment under the section shall be submitted on or before January 15. I have a couple of hands up. I have Representative Iacoboni. Diane, is your hand up for this one? No, take it down. Dave?
Yes, Chip, could you explain to me the thinking behind this deadline?
Yeah, so again, trying to get the program stood up, running, and get the payments out to folks as quickly as possible. Part of the thought was that by having a deadline, it encourages people that are going to be applying to get the applications in and get their payments. The other thing is that we want to, I think the committee has agreed that we really want to fully fund this program in order to make sure that everybody who is eligible that applies will get their full payment. But that there's likely to be not full participation, and that there therefore will be some funds left over at the end of the program, and that we'd like those funds to revert to wherever they came from. And so having a deadline that the applications are in allows sort of all of that process to come to fruition for the agency to make the payments, and then to know how much is going to be left in the fund, and then by the end of the fiscal year to revert any of that to wherever it came, wherever we got the funds from.
Okay, well, it won't come as a surprise to anyone, but I'm uncomfortable with this the benefits seem to be for administrative purposes. And as I said the other day, and I apologize for being redundant, I will never know what it's like to go to Walmart and to be hunted by federal officials, taken away, never to see my family again. I think that will have a chilling effect on people coming forward who might apply for this program. They'll want to see and watch it. There will be some, I'm sure, early adopters, but others who cautiously wait out of fear to see what will happen. And I just think there will surely be a large reversion at the end of the year of unspent money with this here. And more importantly, there will be many people who are deprived, I think, a very critical benefit for people who mostly live in extreme poverty and have been oppressed. So I'm not comfortable. Appreciate your argument though, Chip, and for making it so clear. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. I have Marty and Bob. Marty?
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that this 2-month time period for the program to be open and accept applications, I suggested that because that's the number that Susanna mentioned to us in the proposed timeline she gave us yesterday or whenever it was when we looked at this. She had suggested a 2-month time frame, thinking that that would be adequate for people to be able to get an application in. I'd also like to comment that if indeed AHS contracts out with an organization such as Migrant Justice to do outreach work and to assist people in submitting an application, that I would think there would be less of the fear that Dave just talked about if a person who's eligible could go to a Migrant Justice office and say, you know, I think I'm eligible. Would you help me fill this out? They're not walking into AHS. They're, you know, not walking into the state of Vermont public building. That I would think that would decrease if AHS were to contract with Migrant Justice for those kinds of services. I would think that would increase enrollment and decrease the fear of enrollment. But as I say, the 2 months that we have here, I was basing that on Susanna's comment that she felt 2 months was adequate time for people to file. The other comment I want to make, that just to clarify for everybody here, is that this whole process is assumed to be a first come, first serve. Although if we put enough money in it, then we think we have adequate funds there for people to apply. So you're having rolling applications. People put their application, it gets approved, and it gets payment, goes out the door. So you're rolling all this through. And obviously it rolls beyond the close date of January 15th because they have to process those applications that came in on January 14th. But again, I thought our intent was to get the money out the door as quickly as possible. And again, I felt 2 months was adequate based upon what Susanna had, and especially if AHS is cooperating with a local group that can help individuals make this application without them having to walk up to the State House and do it. So that's our reasoning, or my reasoning, for suggesting the 2 months.
Thank you, Marty. Bob?
Yeah, all I want to do is bring up an issue that's kind of always puzzled me because I don't think it'll ever be over. But in this day and age, with the electronic systems that we have and the people out there, not even from this country necessarily, and the tax department can give you a list of issues down there. I mean, my point is, I think this thing is vulnerable, more so than the tax department ever was. They've got systems that block this to some degree, and I don't know if this has anything. But my point is, I think it's good feed for hackers. And I don't know if there's any protection against that or not. I'm just bringing it up because we're just putting ourselves into a more vulnerable situation, I think. And, you know, those guys don't care what they do. But anyways, that's my story, and that's all I'm gonna say. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. I think that when we have Susanna come in, this is another area that she could weigh in on, would be not just the mirroring the federal program for the taxes or doing the California model or just being silent on C, but also to comment on, as Marty said, she did put I think it was a December 31st deadline. This is January 15, and to hear, we can ask her those questions about individuals not feeling comfortable to apply and get some feedback from her directly. Is that okay with the committee? We leave those two sections open. And then I would move to the next page. On line 3 and 4, I think we took out the word as needed, because when we went to the word may, you no longer need as needed. They would only do it if needed, so it was redundant. So if we could take that out, the last word on line 3 and the needed on line 4, that was in my notes.
Well, why?
Because we decided yesterday when we talked about changing the shall to a may, they shall as needed, but if they may do it, they're only going to do it if they need to, because may means you don't have to. But I mean, I just was cleaning up my notes in the decision that we had voted on yesterday.
Yeah, I think I sent that change to Mike, and maybe he just, you know, there were a lot of them and he may have just missed that one.
Or maybe he feels it's necessary, but it was Linda's discussion. And then we had the quick discussion on may, and may means you only do it if you want to or need to. But not a big piece.
Yeah, and maybe I missed it in my notes to Mike, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I can make that change if that's what the committee would like to do.
But do you,
With it as it is.
you want to, do you want to, as, I mean, you're the legislative council person, if you may partner, do you need the as needed? It is as needed within the word may. That's my
so yeah, so may is discretionary. So that I think implies as needed. So I think you can take it out, and it won't really change the fact that the agency can partner with a public or private entity if they need to do so or want to do so.
It's just a grammatical, technical kind of thing. Mary, if you want it in here, make the argument now, please. Mary, was that you? Are you muted?
That is Mary muting herself so that I don't take your time up. I'll let this go. I liked the other wording. I'm done. Leave it at, take it out.
Okay, let's move down to line 7. Chip, do you want to walk through the language that you came here to address the concern yesterday regarding banking?
Yeah, I mean, folks can read it for themselves, but we thought that the agency would be able to, and really should be the one to just be required to address that issue about how people are going to receive their payments if they don't have access to banking services, or if they don't have a home mailing address that they feel that they can get payments at. I will just remind people that in immediately above that in section 1, we say that the agency will set up the program in consultation with the executive director of racial equity. So we felt that she would certainly be weighing in on how they are going to, what methods they're going to consider in dispersing these payments.
Any questions from the committee on this piece? It was an important piece that we talked about. Marty?
I would just like to comment that I understand Bob's concerned about security of this system. We could add a couple of words on line 6, where it says the agency shall adopt requirements, guidelines, or procedures as necessary to implement and administer the program in a secure manner. I don't know if that's totally redundant or not, but just to recognize that we do want to make sure the program is secure. And you would do that in consultation with the Executive Director of Racial Equity, as mentioned in the first paragraph.
How does the committee feel about putting in a security piece, if it's needed or not here? Thank you, Marty, for offering. Chip, or does anyone have a thought on putting in how to disperse payments in a secure manner? I think that's where you put it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm fine if we want to put in a secure manner somewhere. I'm not sure if that's the place for it. It just seems to put the emphasis in that entire sentence about guidelines, procedures, and requirements seem to be focused on security. I don't feel strongly about, I think they will do that. I think they will, as state government does, be cognizant of the need for security. But if we want to put it in somewhere, I'm fine with that. I just think maybe we need to find the right place to put it in, and we could look to Ledge Council for that.
Okay, Chip, I have Bob and Mary.
Yeah, I'm not sure you can cover my concern with language, but I appreciate Marty's concern and proposal. And I think to show that we're at least thinking about that wouldn't be a bad idea for those that are managing the program. Thank you. That's all.
Thank you, Bob. And Mary?
Again, I think a principle of how we go about this should be to keep it simple. A proposal for how to be securely issue these checks could be, show me 2 forms of ID. And that immediately changes the relationship. I think I totally get Bob's point, and I think Marty's was a nice solution, but play out how this could be done. I have absolute confidence in the Agency of Human Services in making sure that there is some sort of system in place so that they will address security issues. I really don't think we need to say it. And I'm worried that if we do say it, to my extreme analogy of, prove to me who you are before I issue you this payment. And again, we are creating barriers to participation.
Okay, I have Becky. Oh, Becky, go ahead. You don't have to raise your hand.
So I just wanted to point out that if you go down to the next page, there is a section on the agency having procedures, and sorry, right there on subsection F. Go up to page 5. That page 5 lines. Yeah, exactly. So there is language in there about protecting personally identifiable information that I think might get at this security question. So the agency does have to have procedures and safeguards in place to protect that type of information. So I don't know if there's additional information that would not be covered by this that is part of the concern.
Diane. Thank you, Becky. Diane?
Thank you. So if I could just go back to that, I like what the subcommittee had put together on the it shall consider how to disperse payments to applicants who lack banking services. But that's where I would just put a period. Because when you say or lacking a mailing address, that's part of the requirement of being a resident. So you're in conflict there. And so much like what I think we wrestle with here, unlike maybe going into DMV and you have to show, show document that this is where you live, whether you have to show something with a mailing address and of some documentation around that. What we get hung up here is that we're actually going to provide them money or something other than just a, the driving privilege card that they can hand off. So I would, I'm babbling now. I would end this at services and leave that rest of that sentence off.
Diane, we did hear from the executive director that mailing addresses may be difficult for some individuals.
They might be, because it's the same thing like at, which I'm grateful that we have such a great homeless shelter here that they're able to use an address or PO, So in order to not, I don't know, I don't want to bring attention to the fact that they might not have a mailing address. But I'm with Mary, very, very simple here, because the more that we write, the more that it ties the person managing this process up too.
Well, chances are, if they don't have banking services, part of that would be, shall consider how to disperse payments. If they don't have banking services, they may not have mailing addresses, and it's asking there that consider how to disperse these payments.
Right. Just, yeah. If they don't have banking services.
And then maybe we just leave it on at how to disperse payments.
Right, exactly.
And then it would cover everything, whether
Everything.
it's lack of mailing, lack of banking, lack of everything,
Right, right. We just want to let them know that they may have trouble not following some sort of traditional way of sending a payment, and that we want you to consider how you're going to disperse it if there is needs for a different way.
Marty, I have Mary and then Marty.
I liked including the mailing address. I'm not sure ending at dispersed payments. So it's not useful to try to wordsmith as a committee. I was comfortable with the way this was written. I think that, so I'll stop. I was comfortable. I think we need to pay attention to no mailing address, but maybe there's a different way to skin it.
Mary, I agree with you, and I want to take mine off the table, because if I ask it at, if I put it at how to disperse payments, they may disperse them based on mailing addresses. And then that wouldn't work for me at all. So I'm taking mine off the table, and I'm going back to the original language.
I'm comfortable with the original language. I hear you, Di, but
I'm just saying, yeah.
Marty?
Well, I was just thinking, I think I was trying to look at this from the perspective of whoever's going to process this program. Somebody is going to say, I qualify, I would like to apply for this. And they say, fine, were you a resident? And you clarify that part. And then they're say, okay, how are we going to get you the money? And the person is going to have to either give them a mailing address, or please send a check in care of my boss, which is a possibility. Or I will come back on next Tuesday and pick it up. Or, you can send it to my bank, depends. So from the administrator's point of view, they're going to have to work through those details of what kind of information they're going to ask from the applicant as to how to deliver this assistance. And that's again covered in the first paragraph up above, where we're going to be asking the executive director to consult with how you can deliver assistance payments to eligible individuals. So I think all of that has to be discussed as they're setting up the program. And I like the language that we have here, because I think it points out two particular problems that might exist that they need to work on.
Teresa, will you go back up to the language on the page so that we can see on page 4, line 7 and up a little high, right there. So let's just ask the committee, then we can move on. If I could have a full screen, the language on page 4, lines 7 through 10. If you agree with keeping the language as it is, I'll take a hands up. But if you want it, if the majority want it changed, then we will go back to the drawing board. So if you accept regarding lack of banking and addresses, please raise your hand.
Sure.
And those opposed, please say no. Okay, so we are okay with that section. The last 2 small pieces, Chip, that you put in, notwithstanding and deemed necessary, do you want to just do those quickly?
I'm not sure about why notwithstanding is highlighted. The committee, the whole committee had said that they wanted when we made some changes above, to say that the agency may enter into contracts as deemed necessary with any governmental entity. So I sent that change to Mike, but I don't know. I didn't say anything to Mike about the notwithstanding, so I'm not sure why that's in yellow.
Okay.
I checked the previous draft and it looks like that is there. So that just might be a mistake that it's highlighted, but I can check on that.
And I think the as deemed necessary, as Chip, that came from the executive director, and we had talked about it yesterday. Are there questions on any of these small pieces? I'm not seeing any hands. I'm looking for hands. I'm not seeing any. Okay, can we move to the last page, page 5, changes? Bob, do you have a question, or?
I thought I did. I thought I was up there.
Nope, go ahead, Bob. Do you have a question?
Well, I don't know, notwithstanding is referring to what's in law, saying that everything's got to go out to contract for bid. And that's what it's trying to notwithstand, I think. You see what I'm saying? Because it even follows it up down below someplace with any government entity implement and administer the program without the need to competitively bid such contracts. That's what it's notwithstanding, I think.
You're correct, Bob, that what we heard yesterday is that it would take 4 to 6 months to go through a competitive bid process, which would, put us into March next year before anything would start. So that's the reason why this language is in there.
Right.
And I should clarify that that notwithstanding was in the previous draft. So I think I was referring to the fact that it might be a mistake that it's highlighted right now as a change when I don't think it was a change from the last draft.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob and Becky. I think then we're in agreement there to keep it in what it's referring to. On page 6 of 6, I am searching my emails like crazy because I know I had an email from the Committee of Human Services talking about that $6 million. And did anyone else get it? Because I've searched everywhere on my phone for that email.
Kitty?
Yes.
This is Kimberly, and I don't have the email right in front of me, but I do have it printed out. And the Human Services Committee, is your question, did they support this bill?
Yes.
And the answer is yes. They're on record 11-0 in support of the stimulus equity bill as they understood it yesterday.
And did they make a comment regarding the about the additional $3 million coming from CHINS?
They did not, but I will confirm that.
Well, however, if they did accept it, I sent materials through Maria to the chair that had the entire CHINS outline and mentioned the CHINS funding used. And so all those materials were sent to the committee yesterday. So I would assume that they, if they had all of those materials, they would say they did not like the funding if they didn't. Do you want to send a quick email to see if they accepted the funding? Because I know I shouldn't assume, but it seems like it would have been a part of the response.
And this is Nolan. I was in there too, and my recollection is similar to Representative Jessup's, and I do not recall them discussing how it was going to be funded. They supported the policy, but I don't recall them talking about funding.
Did the chair bring up the use of the CHINS money?
I don't recall. I don't know if
Okay.
Representative Jessup recalls either.
However, we are the appropriations committee and we do appropriate, and they are supporting the language. And that's, you know, we're really good about checking in. You want to just circle back, please, Kimberly, that's the proposal that's on the table at this point.
Okay.
The 2 million from the Govs recommend and the 3 million from CHINS. Chip, did you hear any more from the Judiciary Committee? Because I know there was a question about the funding of the Judicial Masters.
Yeah, I had a conversation with a couple of members, including the chair of that committee. They are okay with us using that source of funds. I did say that that we had discussed in our committee ensuring that there was enough money in there left in that fund to support the Judicial Master Program. There certainly will be. The cost of that program is $400,000 a year, or for those positions, and the program goes on, I think, for 3 years. So that's 1.2 million over those 3 years, and if we took 3 million out, there would be enough left to support those. I think the question is if our committee is committing to that. I think there's a question about how we indicate that, and I'd have to turn to Maria, but you know, is there a way to put into the budget or into language that of the remaining money, its intended use is at least to support the Judicial Masters?
Maria, can you do language that would provide that assurances to the committee of the Judiciary Committee?
I'm sorry, were you asking me a question?
No, I was asking Maria. I was just checking with Maria. Chip, do you want to follow up on that language, please?
Sure.
Needed to, and so Chip says there's capacity there for the need that the House Committee is concerned about. We had put 5 million on the table as a total, 2 from the governor, 3 from CHINS, if we felt the funding could work. We have the support of Human Services to do the programming. Kimberly, did you have a?
Yes, so like Nolan and I couldn't remember, the discussion really revolved yesterday around committee priorities. And it's felt that the decision about where the funding comes from be made by appropriators. I think that's a fairly accurate characterization.
Thank you. So I'd like to take a vote now. First, we had put on the table that we would like to get to 5 million. If the committee is in support of using the other $3 million, to use $3 million from the existing CHINS fund to support this initiative, that's what I want to put on the table for a vote. Are there any questions or anyone before we take that vote? Chip?
Can I add one more thing? We had talked in the committee, and I won't characterize it. We had at least talked about the idea that if we were to take the money from this particular source of funds, that if there was any money left in the program at the end, that it should revert back to that particular fund.
Yes.
And I just.
And would you add that to your language too, please? Okay, so Judicial Masters and reversion of language. Thank you, Chip, if you could get that done. And that would be outside of this, bill, and that would be part of the larger. No, the reversion of the money would become part of this bill, I think. But the Judicial Masters would be separate language. So Becky, would that be added here that if we use $3 million from the CHINS fund, how should we tell Becky, how should we reflect that? Does it need to be in this bill or just in the budget bill language?
I think I might just double check with JFO on that. Typically, I would put it in this bill to say that it sounds like an amount will be transferred from that fund and used for this purpose. And so I think it would make sense if you're putting that in here to then also have the reversion language attached to that transfer. But I don't know if this is going into a particular fund. So I just want to double check with JFO on how they would prefer to have that reflected.
Okay, thank you.
I'll just add that I had written to Mike O'Grady about that particular issue and then wrote back to him and saying, why don't we wait on it until we know where the funds are coming from? But he, I think, has begun the process of writing into the bill how the fact that we want reversion. And I said I would ask Maria to work with him to figure out how we best do that in a way that works.
Perfect. Thank you, Diane?
So I'm trying to figure out a way, and I don't want to stir the pot, but I will, that the general fund 2 million is subordinate to the chins, so that if there's $1 million left over, that is to say that you spend the chins money first, and that if there is money left, if that piece is left, that comes back to the general fund? Or in your way, it's like no matter what's left, it goes back to chins. I'm just being a little mother hen around the general fund as well.
So I guess the committee of jurisdiction needs to know if any money that is remaining, do we want it to revert to the general fund or do we want it to revert to the chins fund?
So to me, it would be if there was two, let's just say there was, we put in 5 and let's just say 3 million is left. 2 million comes back to the general fund and $1 million to chins. So it's sort of like we get repaid first on this loan or this program before, if there's only $1 million left, then we've spent all the chins money and it comes back to the general fund.
Yeah, I think that we may get some pushback regarding people who are very concerned about how the chins money was supposed to roll out. And I think
I
that,
won't disagree. I'm just thinking next year's going to be
no,
really.
I understand.
Yeah.
So let's just take a poll of the with the committee, when the money reverts, are we reverting to chins or to GF?
Hopefully there won't be any.
Can't we just do it proportionally? If we've got $1 million left and it was 2/3 one and 1/3 another one, just split the money between the two sources?
That's a possibility, would certainly. Chip's hand, have another?
Yeah, I feel very strongly that any money up to the 3 million that comes out of the chins fund, if that's the right term, needs to go back there, because just for the reason you've said, Madam Chair, that money, it hasn't gone out the door to do the work that it is intended to do, and that's why we're looking to it. But we did appropriate it for a particular purpose. It's a purpose that those involved, the Judiciary Committee and the Judiciary itself, and others, I should say, all the members of the Chins Reform Group would like to see get done. And so if there is money left, I think it really needs to go back there first and complete, whatever's left goes back there first, unless it's more than $3 million, which would mean this program was kind of a failure. But
I have Marian Maida.
I'd like to suggest that we just keep it simple and let it revert back to where they came. We're going to have this conversation again next year when we're figuring out how to appropriate money out. So why have it now? Let's just let it go back to the funds they came from. And then I love what you're trying to do, Di, but we're going to talk.
I had to put it out there because I see it, like we're always taking the back seat And, maybe I don't mind sharing the front seat, but I don't want to be in the trunk all the time.
Mary, you said reverting it back to the funds with an S. Are you suggesting that we split any remainder? You said funds.
However, the simplest way to manage it is,
Okay.
I'm hearing strong feeling about going back to the chins. I'm assuming we're going to look at that pot of money next year. So it's going to be in play again.
I would assume you're correct. Amanda?
Ditto.
Okay, so I am just going to go around the screen quickly and either tell me chins or general fund or split it, and wherever the majority lands is where we're going to put the money in the reversion. So Marty, you're in the top corner. I'm going to call on you first.
I would split it between the sources.
Okay, the next one is Diane.
I'm sorry, I was distracted. What's the question, Madam Chair?
Where would you drop any extra money? Chins, general fund, or split?
Chins up to the 3 million, and anything above that goes to the general fund. But like you said, that means it will be pretty much a failure as a program.
So chins up, so the chins would be up to the 3 million. We wouldn't put more. Thank you for that.
No more than what they put in.
Peter,
Split. I'm sorry, chins, excuse me.
Mary?
I don't care, whatever the committee
I need a vote, Mary.
wants. You won't let me split.
Maida?
Yeah, okay, so chins up to 3 million. Beyond that, it's GF, but hopefully it'll all get used.
So you're at chins. Dave?
Up to 3 million.
Yep.
Split.
Chip?
Chins.
Kimberly?
Chins.
Bob?
Muted.
I apologize. Chins, please.
Okay, and I'm missing somebody. Who am I missing? I went around my, oh, Linda.
Linda.
So we have 6 for chins and 3 to split, and so 6 is a majority of the committee, so we'll drop into the chins up to 3 million. And now my question for the committee is, and we'll use by a raise of hands, if that was if we use the chins money, I need a vote right now from the committee to use the chins money. And would somebody like to put that proposal on the table? Chip, I think that was your proposal anyway.
Yes, it was, and I'll make it now that we, with the understanding that if there is money left, as we've just voted, it will go back into that fund, but that we use $3 million from the chins fund, and maybe Maria should give us the proper way to refer to that, but in any case, the chins fund to fund this equity stimulus bill.
And you're going to work on all the language. So the motion is on the floor to use the $3 million from chins and replacing up to 3 million depending on its usage. If you, any final discussion on this? Those of you agree with the proposal, raise your hand, please. 9, okay, and a verbal no for anyone who opposes. All right, so we know where we're going with that. And Chip, if you could just follow up with the executive director on those 2 places, one on the tax filing piece and one on the application deadline. And I'm following up now to see if we can get Secretary Smith in or Sarah Clark in to talk about administering the program and having it up and running on or before November 15. So I think we can set this aside for a minute, Marty and then Mary.
Yeah, I thought of 2 items that we forgot, unfortunately. In the working group, we talked about having a report back, and I think it would be helpful to have a section here asking for a report back on the program 3 months after whatever our submission deadline is. So if we could add that in, Becky, that would be helpful.
And does
the
a committee?
Yes,
other
I can do
point
that.
in our committee, we talked about,
Let's do
in our subcommittee, we talked about,
keep going, Marty.
I'm sorry.
You keep going. 'cause
Okay, in our subcommittee, we talked about that issue of how we were going to specify that the payment need to come from the state of Vermont. And we were a little, confused about exactly how to do that. It comes into this delivery of assistance grants. Chip was going to ask Michael Grady if he had any thoughts on that issue, but it doesn't show up in this draft. Chip, did he say anything?
Sorry, I was just going to go look at my email because I'm fairly certain I forgot that last point in my email to Mike. But I thought that I had covered the report. As I remember it, we had said that they would report to the Joint Fiscal Committee at their November meeting about how they were going to, maybe that's different than what you were remembering, but how they were going to disperse the payments. I think Peter had asked that we put that in there. But that last point, I think I dropped. So
Chip, we'll
Okay,
let you
but I
follow
think
up on that.
Right. And we also want an end report.
So I missed what Kitty said, but I assume that I'm being tasked with getting that to Mike. So the two things are how to make sure that the checks come from the state of Vermont and not one of the potential third-party contractors, and that there's a report at the end, report back, and that report back, what do we want to make sure is covered in that?
How it was carried out and the results of providing the funding, the stimulus funding to the group of people identified.
The disbursement, a report on
And
the
also,
disbursement.
maybe the challenges.
Can I just ask did we do the numbers for the
I just have
administrative?
Diane, I have Mary and then you. She's had her hand up for a while. I'm sorry, Mary.
Thank you. If we're done with this topic of the report back, I'd like to come back to the issue of the end date for the program of January 15th. I had my hand up on that topic. I had understood that maybe we were going to hear from Susanna Davis again. If Chip is going to have that conversation with her instead of us, I'd really like to probe the issue of, is 2 months enough? I have a very strong feeling that 2 months is not enough. And let me just point out that the 2-month period that we're talking about is Thanksgiving and Christmas. Back in the day when I used to run programs that worked with people who worked in the field, we didn't do anything during hunting season. And Thanksgiving and Christmas strikes me as the kind of the same piece. So while Susanna said, yeah, 2 months may be okay, Thanksgiving and Christmas time is not you lose a month there. And so if you could just explore that, if we're not hearing from her directly, that's the question I would have asked.
Yeah. My goal will be to have Susanna back in if she's available.
We don't have to, but this one I feel really strongly about. So I just wanted to make sure it got on the table.
You hear those pieces, Chip, so if we don't have her, make sure to include those concerns.
I do. I would prefer to have her back in the committee, frankly, given that, the discussion that we've had. But if we can't, I will make sure that I do.
Okay, we have Diane, and then we need to move to another piece of language. Diane?
Sure. Sorry, I might have missed. Did we put a number in for the administrative cost?
Oh, no, we have not. We have not.
Oh.
And
there was 50. I don't know if that was.
And Chip, would you please work with the Joint Fiscal Office in asking you know, based on other areas of what an appropriate administrative cost is that we should consider the percentage.
Were we going to ask AHS to weigh in on that as well?
Sure, yeah. But also I'd like to have JFO weigh in on that as well too. Because they know of other grants that have been put out over the years.
Okay.
Thank you, Chip. All right, we have another piece of language and we're going to break in 25 minutes. Are you guys all set for one more piece of language?
Yep.
We have, and Becky, thank you very now I've got to think who did which language. Becky, thank you very much for filling in for Mike and helping with this. I appreciate it. We
Thanks.
now have Betsy Ann Rask with us, and we've had some legislators and some caucuses that have concern regarding the Pay Act and feel that language is really needed to clarify what the true intent was of our committee and the legislature when we funded the first year of Pay Act and were silent on the second year of Pay Act. If committee members have the desire to go back and listen to the testimony from the administration, I would advise that you do that, because we did ask specifically, being silent, what does this mean? And we did hear testimony before we made our decision for funding 1 year at a time. And the VSEA has a great concern and there are some language proposals that are floating around that the committee should look at that notwithstand certain provisions in statute. And I'm going to be perfectly honest that there is some concern that the legislature not get mixed in with making decisions around negotiations, because the legislature's responsibility is the funding of the Pay Act. The negotiations are within the realm of the union and the administration. And so we can have everything on the table. It will be a full discussion. And our choices are language or no language. And if we have language, what do we want that to include? And so, Becky, I have just a piece of language as a starting point. And can we pull that up, Teresa? And I do not want to speak for the committee, but I want the committee members to be very clear in what you believe the intent of the language was that we whenever we passed it, June. And if this is not what you feel the intent is, and you feel more is needed or less is needed or nothing is needed, make sure we hear from everyone's recollection. Becky, would you walk through this, please?
Sure. Hello, for the record, Betsy Ann Rask, Legislative Counsel. So this goes back to our discussion about the different Pay Act implications that we had on June 22nd. If you recall, I had drafted a memo for this committee about my understanding of different Pay Act implications, depending on what sort of funding the General Assembly did for the collective bargaining agreements, the 2-year collective bargaining agreements. And we reviewed that memo together on June 22nd, reviewing the different Pay Act implications, and then with a note to confirm what those were, what those implications would be for the parties in practice, as you mentioned, Madam Chair. And there was testimony from, at that time, the Department of Human Resources, agreeing with the accuracy of the memo. What this language would do here is confirm what the legislative intent was in enacting the Pay Act provisions that you did enact, which, as a reminder, were full funding for the first year of the collective bargaining agreements. But for the second year, the language was the General Assembly will consider any compensation increases for fiscal year 2022 at a later date. Because at that point, the General Assembly was not sure what it would be able to do, but it was not saying what funds it would appropriate for FY22 at that time. With the understanding being, as set forth in that memo, that because the state has a statutory obligation to support the existing CBA terms, but on the other hand, because the ledge was only funding year one, there would be a need to renegotiate, but that renegotiation would be a wait and see provision of the parties, because the parties were not sure whether the General Assembly would appropriate a different amount of funds for year 2 of the contract, FY22. And that was the understanding, that there will not be a requirement to renegotiate the terms of year 2 of the collective bargaining agreement, as I recall, and in reviewing the tapes. So what this language would do is, as drafted, confirm what the understood legislative intent was in fully funding year 1, but not making a funding decision yet for year 2. So this would say that in accordance with the Pay Act, which is set forth in 2020 Acts and Resolves number 120, sections B1 through 5, and particularly that B1C of the Pay Act, which is quoted here in regard to fiscal year 22, that the General Assembly will consider any compensation increases for fiscal year 2022 at a later date. This section would confirm the legislative intent of the Pay Act was to fully fund the first year of the CBAs and to make a funding decision regarding the second year of the CBAs at a later date, and that accordingly, the Pay Act does not require the state Department of State's attorneys and sheriffs, the Judiciary Department, and the bargaining units covered by the Pay Act to renegotiate any terms of their collective bargaining agreements that apply during that second year, which is July 1, 21 through June 30th, 22, fiscal year 22, unless and until the General Assembly appropriates a different amount of funds for that period. And that language, unless and until the General Assembly appropriates a different amount of funds for that period, is taken directly from the 2 statutory provisions regarding when renegotiation is required for the state and the Department of State's attorneys and sheriffs. That language is in 3 VSA 982C, which is that after the governor and the Department of State's attorneys request sufficient funds to fund the CBAs, they take effect if the General Assembly appropriates a sufficient amount of funds. And then the statute goes on to say, if the General Assembly appropriates a different amount of funds, the terms affected by that appropriation shall be renegotiated based on the amount of funds actually appropriated by the General Assembly. As a reminder, the General Assembly has not yet appropriated funds or made a decision on what those should be. So this is drafted. You will, as the chair said, you would need to decide whether this does set forth your legislative intent, and then this would be an explanation of legislative intent if this language were enacted by the General Assembly.
Thank you, Betsy Ann. Are there questions regarding this draft of language? Teresa, can we have a full screen up so I can see everybody? I have Bob and then Peter. Bob?
Well, I was just trying to read that and get a
Oh,
clearer.
go back to it, Teresa. Teresa, go back to it.
Yeah, then can you come back? I don't know.
Yep. No, go back, Teresa. I'm sorry, Bob. Go ahead.
Now she's way up at the beginning again. I need it down at the second part she had up.
Okay.
Where
move
was
down,
it?
Teresa.
There it is. Get that thing out of here.
There you go. That's the whole language right there.
Okay, all right. I think I'm fairly okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I thought, and boy, did I read that fast. I thought that if the legislature didn't fund PAYAC, then I think it was the next year it would come out of whatever the department's cash flow is. Is that not so, Betsy?
We made no provisions. There may have been discussions around the table, but when we passed it, we made no provisions on the second year other than we would be silent until we understood the
No.
fiscal plan.
I get that, but I thought that's what was in statute or what had to happen if we did not fund the PAYAC. Am I wrong?
Betsy Ann, you may want to answer this.
I'm sorry. So the language in statute in regard to funding the collective bargaining agreements, the main one for the executive branch is in 3 VSA 982C. And that language is just if the General Assembly appropriates a different amount of funds, then they have to renegotiate the collective bargaining agreements. The terms of the agreement affected by that appropriation of the different amount of funds based on the amount of funds actually appropriated by the General Assembly. So, sorry, pardon me, sorry.
Okay, thank you. I guess I remembered it incorrectly, but thank you. That's good.
Peter?
Actually, Betsy Ann, you started down the road of answering my question. So let me restate what you just said. And if I caught it correctly, then that's good. Statute says you do not renegotiate unless the General Assembly appropriates a different amount of money to fulfill the required appropriation. So if the General Assembly appropriates a different amount of money, that triggers renegotiations. Otherwise, there is nothing in statute that would trigger a renegotiation. Is that accurate?
All I can do for you is to recite the statute, and you recited it, because we are at the intersection of legislative and executive branch. But I'll repeat that the language is, quote, if the General Assembly appropriates a different amount of funds, the terms of the agreement affected by that appropriation shall be renegotiated based on the amount of funds actually appropriated by the General Assembly. The preceding sentence says, if the General Assembly appropriates sufficient funds, the agreement shall become effective at the beginning of the next fiscal year. And I think some of what part of the conversation was that the CBAs are for a 2-year period. But as a reminder, this committee did not decide what amount of funds to appropriate for the second year of the contract. So at this stage has not appropriated funds and will determine at a later date, as you indicated in the Pay Act, what to appropriate. So that's
Thank you very much.
So Betsy Ann, we don't need to add any additional language because it's in statute what happens if there is a change to the funding in the second year, right? That exists.
That exists. It's up to the executive branch now to execute this law based on what was enacted by the General Assembly, but statute does say right now when they need to renegotiate, and it's renegotiated if the General Assembly appropriates a different amount of funds.
Okay, and after the word different amount, do we need to be, or should we be specific, a different amount than the amounts required to fully fund the collective bargaining agreements, so that the different amounts has a complete, has a complete definition to it? A different amount than what? Than what was, do you understand what I'm asking?
Yes, so I think I can back up and read to you the full 3 VSA 982C, which begins by saying that after ratification by the appropriate unit memberships, I think it's collective bargaining agreements shall be submitted to the governor, who, quote, who shall request sufficient funds from the General Assembly to implement the agreement. And then it goes on, if the General Assembly appropriates sufficient funds, meaning to implement the full agreement, the agreement shall become effective at the beginning of the next fiscal year. If the General Assembly appropriates a different amount of funds, the terms of the agreement affected by the appropriation shall be renegotiated based on the amount of funds actually appropriated by the General Assembly.
Could we make reference to that section?
You could, if you wanted to, in this language, reference that statute. In this current draft at the end, that language, unless and until the General Assembly appropriates a different amount of funds for that period, is taken directly from that statute. But if you want to,
I think maybe we should reference it, but I also think that we should just be very clear, a different amount of what and really a different amount than the amounts required to fully fund the CBA.
Gotcha.
Well,
I think we need that clarification. I have two hands up. Let me see, Mary.
So given that in this draft, Betsy Ann was reflecting what the statute says, I think we need to be careful about modifying what the statute says.
We're not modifying it.
She paraphrased it here, and you are suggesting changing the paraphrase. I was liking staying as close to the existing statute as possible in the language that we are using. So I understood what it was meaning. And so I wasn't seeing the problem that you're trying to fix.
I would need Betsy Ann I don't see where I'm not asking or wanting to change any statute. I'm really wanting to make sure it's very clear what statute we're referring to and what a different is in response to.
That's the way I read it, Madam Chair.
do you want me to weigh in?
Please, Betsy Ann.
Okay. The other term that statute uses is sufficient funds. So it first provides if the General Assembly appropriates sufficient funds, the agreement becomes effective. And then it says if the General Assembly appropriates a different amount of funds, that's when they have to renegotiate. So if you wanted to have further clarification, perhaps the language is that a different amount of funds that is less than sufficient to fully fund that period, something to that effect, if you did want to add that clarification, because the different amount of funds is referring to something different than sufficient funding of the agreement.
I want to make it very clear that we're not suggesting any change in statute. So I need you to guide me how we do this. And maybe at this point, it's a technicality that we'll work offline and determine exactly what the wording needs to be and where we cite statute, so that we're not creating any unintended consequence, and that we don't, sit with a whole committee discussion, kind of like we did with the last piece of language, and then we can bring it back. Any other? Chip has his hand up. Chip?
Yeah, maybe I'll ask Betsy Ann if it's helpful to focus on this part, if you want to continue the discussion right now. So in that second sentence, where it says, if the General Assembly appropriates a different amount of funds, the terms of the agreement affected by that appropriation shall be renegotiated based on the amount of funds. I read that as giving the possibility that you're talking only about the part of the negotiation that's affected by a different amount of funds. So it doesn't open up any possibility of renegotiation until we appropriate a different amount, if we did, in the second year. And I wonder if somehow using that particular part of the sentence in our language would be helpful in making clear what our intent is.
Betsy Ann, did you have a thought on Chip's comment? Have we lost you, Betsy Ann?
No, I'm sorry. I was just thinking it over.
Oh, okay.
I think perhaps we'll just to keep it more streamlined, if you do want to have further clarification, there could perhaps be just a cross-reference to 3 VSA 982C and then the judiciary's 1 and 3 VSA 1036C.
But I'll just finish by saying I think that what's drafted here works in my view, but if we were trying to create any more clarification, that's where I would look.
Thank you, Chip. I have Mary and then Bob.
Well, I am guessing that I'm going to be responsible for this section, given that I have human resources and I reported it last time around. So I wanted to offer to work with Betsy Ann to take the committee's comments and considerations and get a different draft. So that's one. And then earlier, a few minutes ago, when we began the discussion, Kitty, you asked if we recalled the intent of our work before, and if this accurately reflected the intent. And so I wanted to come back to that. I, a while ago, sat down and listened to the tape because I wanted to make sure that I remembered it correctly. And I think this very accurately captures what we discussed and what our intent was. And frankly, this is what I've been saying to people in the, 2 months since we did this. So I think it grabs it very accurately. So thank you, Betsy Ann, for that.
Thank you, Mary. And I agree that this is your part of your part of the budget, Mary. And the crafting of the language, I think, doesn't need to be an entire committee working on it. It's just not time efficient, and that we would move it back to Ledge Council and then bring a revised version back for the committee to consider and critique. Bob?
Yeah, I don't personally think we need anything. I think we're covered with what we did, and we didn't do anything that wasn't thought to be absolutely necessary in a time when we didn't know, and we still don't know a lot about what was going to happen next year. And so instead of just making promises, we kind of left it open-ended. But, you know, I think the union employees can all sit back and trust that their contracts will be honored. And I don't know as I've ever seen one not honored. So, you know, I think it's a lot of hype over nothing, but that's just me. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Maida?
I just want to add that from my perspective, the tape has been reviewed. So, I mean, what was said. And in my mind, the language that's been presented to us captures what the intent was. I don't understand necessarily why we need to change. Though if we need to change, I guess we'll change it. But I just want to say this language does it for me as a statement of what we thought we were up to. Yeah.
And there may not need to be any changes. I would just like to understand a few pieces with Legislative Council and with Mary, and we'll bring something back this afternoon for the committee to consider. And many times we put things in the budget to really fully make our intent clear. And this is, there's several legislators who are very concerned what the intent was, and they weren't sitting in our committee. And yes, they can go back and listen to the tape, but I think they want some confirmation on the intent from this committee. So it is noon, and Betsy Ann, thank you. Mary and I will be in touch with you, and I think that, you know, we're really close on this language. This afternoon, we're going to see if we can close up Woodside. And Marty, will you have some energy and technology pieces? That's tomorrow, or is that today, do you think?
I think it will be today after they are meeting at noon. And I think by 1:30, I will have some answers from them.
Great. And Diane, you're going to have a couple pieces of language, or one more piece of language. I think that there's just a small date change that we can do. And I think that
It's not a date change. I'm sorry.
whatever
That was
change.
in the that was Fish and Wildlife. This is the ledge stuff.
Okay. And then whatever other pieces that we can sort out, and use this time also to reach out about any CRF funding with the committee jurisdiction that you're tracking or following. But let's come back to 1:15, and we need a needed break. We've really sat for a long time this morning. Betsy Ann, thank you very much. And Mary, I'll reach out to you. See you at 1:15. Thank you.
See you later.
Going offline.